3, 2,
Hey everyone,
1,
I'm Robert.
and we are live, ladies and gentlemen. Hopefully things are working this time. I believe I found the problem with my mic. Had to change one of the settings, but I did do a recording, tested it, and it seems to be working. However, if any of you notice a problem, please, if you would, type it in chat, let me know. But hopefully we're all good now. We should be able to proceed forward. And that did set me back about 10 minutes. I'm surprised I was able to find the problem to fix it so quickly, but I'm glad I did. Okay, we need to try to jump right into this. So again, with a quick disclaimer, I'm in no way affiliated with any of the manufacturers or reviewers, and no one's paying me for any of the opinions I'm going to be putting out here. They're all based on my own personal experience and just the data that I've collected. And just be advised that technology evolves. It's, growing every day. So whatever's presented here today is going to change a bit over time. So I'm just trying to, put out what we have for right now. Because this launch for AMD's Ryzen 3rd Gen is been very much like past MMO experience I've had. It was not a good launch. I mean, maybe to them, but for all the reviewers and people that are trying to shop and figure out what they want to do to upgrade, it's not been a good launch. Hey, Drago, welcome back. Thank you for attending the stream. So the goal of this stream is to help educate those of us who are interested in building a new desktop systems. The focus will be gaming, but we're going to discuss other things. And obviously, we're going to be focusing a lot on Ryzen 3rd Gen and whether or not it's going to be the right fit for any of you guys. Everybody's use case is going to be different. It's going to depend on several factors, budget, specifically in games, whether you're playing single or multiplayer games or both, your target resolution and frame rate, whether you're doing any kind of production work such as live streaming, video editing, encoding, rendering or surfing porn, and whether or not you want to future-proof your system. You may or may not be concerned with that. So we're going to kind of discuss a few different scenarios, because whatever I may end up going with as far as my user case isn't going to be y'all's user case. And as I go through the stream, you will clearly see I'm not a fanboy, because I'm going to be making recommendations on both sides based on user scenarios. However, during those recommendations, just be advised that the goal here isn't to flex anybody's ego on who's right or wrong. The goal is to try to get the information that we all want and need to get the best products, best performing products for our money. And at the end of the day, whether you go Intel, AMD, or NVIDIA for whatever parts, that doesn't matter. It matters on the performance and getting the best for your money. Now, to kind of help keep this live stream structured in a way that will allow all of us to utilize our time as efficiently as possible, even though I already kind of foobarred that because of my mic issues. Fortunately, I got it fixed. I'm going to be breaking this down, the live stream down into sections. So if you can't stay for the entirety of the stream for whatever reason, this video will be posted as an archive and you can go back and watch it later. And you can obviously, I'll include timestamps. And if you have any questions or comments, you can drop them in the comment section below and I'll do my best to answer them or point you in the direction where you can find your answers. So the sections that we're going to be covering, we're going to start out first discussing CPUs. Then we're going to move into motherboards. I'm getting a little ahead of myself. So at the end of each section, I'm going to do like a quick Q&A. So any comments or questions that you guys may have, I mean, you're welcome to put them out while I'm discussing it, but I'm going to hold off making any comments or answering those questions until the Q&A section at the end of that specific section. So for example, I'll discuss CPUs, I'll put out all the information. Then once I've pretty much done my spout, then you guys can throw out your comments, questions, or whatever, just discussing CPUs. And if the question is like really, really long and drawn out, it's going to take me a lot longer to answer, then I'm going to ask not to minimize you as a person, and that your question isn't valid or anything like that, but just to utilize our time as efficiently, I'm going to ask that we go ahead and try to save that for the final section of Q&A. And if you can't stay, like I said, just go back to the video and post it in the comment section below. And then we're going to move into motherboards, and then we'll do a motherboard Q&A. Then we'll do memory, and then we'll do a memory Q&A and GPU Q&A. And then the final section will be basically like a user case section where we kind of bring everything together of what we discussed. And I'll talk a little bit about different build scenarios based on different budget types. And then obviously if you have questions, maybe you want to do a build, you want my personal advice on something, I'll throw it out there, and then we can just discuss whatever, and we can talk as much as we want at that point, but just try to keep on track. And real quick, I'm going to be omitting a few things from the stream, specifically. So here's the things I'm going to be omitting mostly. We're not going to be discussing AMD APUs. So if you're interested in 3200G or 3400G, not going to be discussing it. GPU SLI and Crossfire support, not going to be discussing it. I will say that I will discuss it slightly for production, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. If that's your thing, if that's something you're interested in, if you're doing it for gaming, I would strongly advise against it. I've tinkered with it before on many generations, not this generation, but it's a general consensus that it's a waste of money for the most part. But if you've got a lot of fuck you money and you want to do it, more power to you. I'm just not going to discuss it. Bitcoin mining. If you're interested in Bitcoin mining, not going to discuss it. Notebooks and laptops, not going to discuss it. Dual system setups for gaming and streaming. That one's going to be kind of a gray area. I will discuss it, but unless you guys have a lot of questions and you want to set something like that up, I'm not going to spend that much time on it, but I will discuss it a little bit. And finally, before we get into things, if any of you guys find any of the information I put out here conflicting, meaning you disagree, or you've heard another reviewer put out information that is basically conflicting with what I'm presenting, that's okay. All I can say is save it for the topic Q&A at the end of this section. And if we can cover it real quickly during that, we will. And if it's something that's going to end up being like a long drawn out conversation, then we'll probably save it for the final Q&A. The only thing that I ask is if you do have that information, cite your source. If you don't have it, then come back later, post it in the comment section below. And if you still don't have it and you're just putting out information without any way to back it up, I'm going to delete the comment and just ignore it, because at that point I'm going to consider you're just trolling. May sound like a dick thing to do, but I'm trying to save us all time. The other thing is, if you've done your own testing, that's cool, no problem. I'll acknowledge it. But here are the requirements. If you've done that, you need to provide proof. You need to provide something like a video that has your hardware configuration, your testing methodology, and your benchmark results. And put it up there. Well, I'll take a look at it. I'm interested. All right, now that that's all out of the way, let's start getting into the CPU discussion here. Obviously, I got a chart here. It's got like, some of the core counts and the pricing and the cache and things like that. Obviously, you guys can look that over. You probably already have. But just real quick, I know some of you guys are going to already know a lot of the stuff I'm putting out. I understand, but some people don't, so I'm going to put it out anyways. So obviously, we're going to be focusing more on the gaming side. So obviously, when you're gaming, you're going to have what is known as either CPU bound or GPU bounds. Boy. And I forgot to turn off that bot. But anyways, and depending on your resolution is going to determine whether or not you are going to be CPU bound or GPU bound. Now, generally, if you are playing on a low res, such as 1080p, anywhere from maybe 144 FPS up to 240 FPS, you're going to be more CPU bound. If you're playing games more at a mid-range, say 1440p, you're going to be probably within that 80 FPS to 144 FPS range. Obviously, give or take a little bit, guys. I mean, don't hold me to the letter. I mean, there's flexibility. You're going to be a little bit more on the balance, because at that point, your system is going to balance, unless your system's like severely outdated, should be more balanced as far as your CPU usage and your GPU. Generally, it's going to lean, you want it to lean more towards GPU, generally. And if you're doing high resolution gaming, such as 4K gaming, you're generally going to be more on the lower end on your FPS. I would say if you're fortunate, as I am, you're going to be running anywhere from 60 to 80 FPS. And at that point, you should be purely GPU bound. That doesn't mean you should minimize or neglect your CPU, but that's just the generalization of it. And as I said before, you want to try to be more either GPU bound or balanced. You never want to be CPU bound unless you're a low resolution. Generally, low resolution, high frame rate gaming is for like esports, and I don't know what everybody plays here. I don't know who would be doing that type of gaming. But if you are, then yeah, obviously at that point, you definitely want to go more CPU bound. Now, as you guys may or may not know, the Ryzen 3rd gen, just like 2nd gen Threadripper, offers what is known as PBO. Now, PBO is an AI algorithm written by AMD that allows the CPU to boost. And I did play a video during my first attempt, but I will probably end up playing it again. In fact, let me go ahead and do that now, just so we can get that out of the way. I said I had some technical problems with my mic earlier, so give me just 1 second. Okay, this is Robert Hallock, obviously, senior technical marketing manager, and this guy is awesome. When I built my Threadripper, he was just such an invaluable source, and I trust him. I will admit that there are some problems with this launch, and we're going to get into that in a little bit here. But for the most part, if he puts out information, I trust him. And whether or not you want to choose to trust him, that's up to you. But he's legit. And I found that when I was running into problems with my Threadripper, not that I had a lot of problems, I was able to use him as a resource. He had a lot of technical videos that kind of helped me get it tweaked to where it needed to be. And everything checked out just as he said. And so anyways, I'll play the video on PBO because some of you may or may not be familiar with this technology, but it's very, very important and really cool stuff.
Precision Boost Overdrive. Now that is a feature you may be...
Restart again.
Hey everyone, I'm Robert. Let's talk about Precision Boost Overdrive. Now that is a feature you may be familiar with because we introduced it on the 2nd gen AMD Ryzen Threadripper CPUs, but it is back with some new features, and we've updated it for the AMD Ryzen 3000 family of desktop processors. So if you have an AMD Ryzen 3000 series CPU, Ryzen 5 and above, this is a feature that is now available on your platform with an AMD X570 motherboard. So let's jump in. On the topic of AMD X570 motherboards, we're going to draw one of these beautiful new boards here with our delightful pink squeaky marker. And we're going to put in a CPU socket. And let's put some memory slots in as well, and you can just imagine some PCI Express Gen 4 slots down there. Now, if you were to pull the heatsink off of your new motherboard, don't do that, that violates warranties. But if you were, you would see little squares like this surrounding the CPU socket. And those are called VRMs, or Voltage Regulator Module. The VRMs are what actually supply power from the power supply in your computer through the motherboard to that CPU socket. That is where the electricity to your CPU comes from. So we'll draw like a little lightning bolt in over there. The next thing you need to know is that every motherboard, and it doesn't matter if it's an AMD motherboard or otherwise, there is a minimum specification defining how many of those VRMs there needs to be, because a CPU must have a certain amount of guaranteed power to give you the performance and features that are listed on the box. But we also know that if you take that heatsink off, many motherboards have a lot of VRMs underneath. They have way more than what the minimum specification calls for. So let's say this little bar here is your CPU performance at stock. That is out of the box, brand new processor, and you haven't tweaked anything yet. What we do with Precision Boost Overdrive is let the CPU in the socket communicate with the motherboard to learn how much extra capacity is there. So if this is what the CPU is expecting, the motherboard might be able to provide this or this, a lot more, a lot extra. And that extra can be used to deliver more power to the socket, which allows potentially the CPU to run at a higher clock speed for a longer period of time. And more clock speed for longer means more performance, especially in games. They just love extra clock speed. So if you have all this extra capacity and you turn Precision Boost Overdrive on to use it, your performance chart might look something like this. If you're in a game, your CPU is going to be fluctuating up and down, which it always does. Maybe now, because you have that extra headroom, your CPU fluctuates at a higher average clock speed overall. And that is what PBO is designed to do. It's designed to give you that extra clock speed, that extra stability in the clock speed to enable more performance. But there's a little more. So that's the normal Precision Boost Overdrive on all parts. But what is new and interesting in the Ryzen 3000 family is this idea that you can automatically overclock too. So we're going to take this little corner right here and we're going to draw a clock speed curve. And we'll put I here for idle and PB here for Precision Boost. That's the highest clock speed you see printed on the box. And that could be, say, 4.55 gigahertz. Now, with this automatic overclocking feature that's new, what if you could plug in up to 200 megahertz of extra boost, and suddenly that's 4.75 gigahertz. You are overriding the boost clock, you're overclocking the number that's printed on the box. So let's put all of that together. You have a nice enthusiast AMD X570 motherboard that gives you more power than the CPU is officially designed to consume, and you can plug in a higher than normal clock speed. That means you can hit that higher clock speed for more performance. You could potentially sustain it for longer because you have more CPU or more voltage going to the CPU, and that clock speed sustains a higher average frequency, which will give you potentially more consistent performance in your game as well. And that is what Precision Boost Overdrive with automatic overclocking is designed to do, and that is exclusively available on the all-new AMD Ryzen 3000 series CPUs.
Okay, now that we got that out of the way, now I do need to say something about this PBO. This, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, poor name. You mean as far as like PBO? I guess. This launch has been pretty bumpy, and right now there's the chip name. Okay, it's not exactly, if any of you've looked at any other reviewers, a lot of them, I won't say all of them, it depends on the reviewer you looked at, a lot of their data is incorrect because of certain bias issues that were sent out that were not the correct bias that they were supposed to use for their reviews when they went to put out all the benchmarks for everybody to check out. However, I do have a review that did have the correct bias and everything. So when I start showing you guys benchmarks and slides, at least when it comes to the CPUs, those are pretty accurate. However, and I know, and I don't want to contradict myself because I just said that, you know, I trust Robert Hallock and everything. PBO is not exactly working the way he explained it there. A lot of people were having issues with the clock speeds not clocking up to where the designated, you know, as far as like if you look here on the chart, you know, like for example, the 38 or 3900X, let's use that as an example. It's supposed to boost to 4.6. Linus. Well, we can talk about Linus later, but yeah. I like Linus though, but not for reviews. So it's supposed to boost to 4.6. A lot of reviewers were just not getting that. And that was part of it was because of the bias and everything. So I believe that once the biases are all kind of ironed out, which is going to take a little time, and once PBO gets, you know, kind of ironed out, we'll start seeing even better performance than what we're seeing now. Might not be a lot, might not really benefit games as much. You know, it just depends, but it should get better. All right. Now that we got that out of the way, let's okay. Now according to what I understand, and obviously I haven't gotten mine yet. I ordered mine this morning because I finally was able to get one. And I don't want to spend too much time talking about my build. I can save that for the final section. Because what my build isn't going to help you guys that much. But there's supposed to be what is known as 2 PBOs, multi-core and single core. The multi-core is supposed to basically give you like what I'm getting on my Threadripper right now, getting an all-core clock speed across the board, across all cores. And like generally that all-core clock speed is going to be lower than your single high core. So my Threadripper, if I'm not using PBO, can boost to as high as 4.4 on a single core, and it'll throw it around to all the different cores. But since I'm running PBO, it's actually leveled it out to where I'm getting 4.15 to 4.2 across all cores. But that's because I'm encoding that. It gives me more of a benefit for that. So there's the multi-core PBO where you're going to get a flat all-core boost, and generally when you get that, it's going to be 200 to 300 megahertz less than the highest boost. So like if you look at the 3900X, the highest boost is supposed to be 4.6. If you're doing an all-core PBO overclock, you're probably looking at roughly at anywhere from 4.2 to 4.3. But you're probably not going to get much higher than that unless you're doing some extreme cooling. Either you got a really decent, expensive custom loop, or even going as high as dried ice and stuff like that. But I did watch a video from DeBauer who did it, and these chips are already pushed to the max. There's not a lot of overclocking headroom, and we could talk a little bit more about that later. Then there's the single core PBO, where it's supposed to help you boost like what Robert was just talking about, where you're actually getting even higher than like 4.6, maybe 4.7 or 4.8. That has not been seen yet. It doesn't mean it won't happen, but we still haven't seen those numbers yet. In fact, it's been a little bit the other way. So hopefully, like I said, with more BIOS updates, more updates to Ryzen Master and, the software and whatnot, hopefully we'll start seeing that. But right now, that's not the case. But so that's kind of like, I guess, the bad news. The good news is these things perform well. And I will say, just from my own personal expectations, it has met the expectations very well and somewhat exceeded it on the production side. On the gaming side, if you're targeting a mid-range or a low-end CPU, it's met my expectations. But if you're targeting more of a high-end CPU, something that's going to be able to perform as good as perhaps a 9700K or a 9900K, Intel's still king on that front. And depending on the benchmarks you look at, and depending on the games you play, that may or may not be a factor for you. I want to build my gaming rig to be able to play a variety of different games. I don't play just one type of game. So I don't want to pigeonhole myself into, building for one specific niche. But there are some people that are just going to build a gaming system just to play World of Warcraft. And if that's the case, then that would make sense to go one way or the other. Anyways, getting back on track. There's also, when we get into the memory, there's also this thing known as memory allocation, specifically dynamic local mode. Now, that's also another feature built into Ryzen Master, which hasn't been talked about a lot with this launch yet. And also, we're going to get into the RAM speeds and whatnot. But that is supposed to basically help Windows through the Ryzen Master kind of help the CPU communicate with the memory controller to try to kind of allocate the information being processed back or sent back and forth between the memory and the CPU to speed things up. So that is something like I said, hasn't been discussed or tested a whole lot. I can say though, right off the bat, that Hardware Unboxed did a testing RAM speeds from 3200 to 3600. He tested those two speeds. There was no difference in performance on gaming side or production. It was pretty much the same. So that may change with more updates, but right now there's no added benefit, that's kind of disappointing, to be quite honest. But it's actually good on one end, because that means that you don't have to go be spending all this crazy money on memory. like, you know, getting like those 3600 kits to get a good, decent one, they're like $250. And now you don't need to do that. You can go buy yourself maybe, you know, either a low end kit or even a decent mid-range kit for, you know, anywhere from $70 to $150. So I guess it depends on how you want to look at it. Another thing too, in the Windows profile performance manager, they are recommending for these CPUs to use balance mode. And generally, if you're using Ryzen Master, it should enable that. So you shouldn't have to mess with that. And you also want to be downloading the chipsets drivers from AMD as well, which all that should be included when you do the downloads. Don't rely on Windows Update. Get it from the AMD website. Another thing real quick, if you guys want to go hardcore on your CPU, okay, there is a website known as Silicon Lottery. The link will be in the description below. If it's not there now, it will be later. And you can go to that website. They buy CPUs brand new and they test them, and they basically find out which ones are binned highest so you can get the higher clocked CPUs, both Intel, and they're going to be doing Ryzen as well. I don't think Ryzen, based on what's been tested, is going to benefit that much on that front. Maybe a little bit, but probably not too much. And I think that's it. So I guess we can go ahead and get into the benchmarks. So let me pull that up. I'm going to start with the lower end CPUs, and then we'll move up to the higher end CPUs. So we'll start with the 3600, and we're going to start with games, of course, since most of us here are probably here for games. And Gamers Nexus also did a benchmark result, and he also had the correct bias, just like Hardware Unboxed did, so we don't have to worry about, even if more updates come out, these are probably the most accurate results you're going to find. The reason I'm using Hardware Unboxed over Steve's is, by the way, love Steve Burke, love Gamers Nexus, and definitely recommend checking him out. The only reason I'm not using it is his charts are very difficult to read if you're on a mobile device. And I knew that some of you guys might be watching my stream on a mobile device or even on Steve's stream or videos, and his are very difficult to read because he's got a bunch of charts there and they're all squished together. But if you're on a monitor or TV or something like that and you're looking at it, it's not so bad, or maybe a larger tablet. But that's the only reason I'm not using it, but most of the information is very close. So with that out of the way, if you're looking at a low end build, just cut it dry, and we'll go through the benchmarks here. The 3600 is legit. I mean, you don't even have to bother with the 3600X. You could if you want to spend the extra money, but this little CPU, and I call it little, is a beast. I mean, if you look at it, compared to the 8700K, which is what I just had an 8700K. I sold it, but it performed well. I had no complaints. But this 3600, when you compare it for gaming, it hangs in there very well with an 8700K. 8700K, I don't know what the price is today. I know that the 9700K is, I've been able to locate the 9700K as low as $360. Most places are still at $400 and $420. The A700K is, if it still hasn't dropped in price, is probably still running around that $360 mark. So, and again, this is leaning more towards the focus of you're building a low-end, low-budget system. And I hate to use the word low-end because this will do really well. But you're not going to be, maybe doing a lot of productivity, and you're maybe not going to be pushing, 4K or even high 1440p expectations. So let's go to the next slide here. Now, this is 1440p benchmarks results. And by the way, need to give credit. I should have done this when I first started. This is Hardware Unboxed's benchmark results. Highly recommend checking them out. Steve and Tim, amazing Aussies. These guys are legit. They're not shills. They try to help as much as they can for the consumers. They're not out there to be paid. They're not paid reviewers in a sense where AMD's sliding them some extra money under the table to speak better about them, like some reviewers. Linus. Did I say that on stream? Oh, I think I did. Oh, well. But anyways, So as you can see here, we've got the 3600, and this is Assassin's Creed, obviously, and this is the 1440p results. And if you look at it, I mean, even compared to the 3700X, I mean, the difference in performance, and this is a $200 processor, guys, $200, and the 3700X is $330. I mean, this is insane. Now, like I did say before earlier, that on the low end and mid range, AMD is kicking ass. But when we start getting to the high end, that's where things start to, it's all a matter of your expectations, but they don't quite meet what they said. But it's okay. They don't have to. They still did amazing. But if you look at it and compare it, obviously, with some of the other, some of the other CPUs, even the 2700X. And the 2700X has come down in price. I checked it this morning, and it was around $250 because I was trying to decide, should I go with the 2700X or should I just go ahead and pay the little extra and go with the 3700X? Just real quick, I did go with the 3700X, but I'll talk about that more later. But not for my gaming rig. But when you compare the two, if you want a low budget system, that 3600 is a beast of a system. Or a beast of a CPU. So that is amazing. And then here's the Battlefield 5, and a lot of these games I don't play. Some I will, some I won't. But when Steve does his benchmark testing, he tries to pick the newest titles and the ones that are going to be heavily bound for the specific type of testing that he's doing. So, that's if you're concerned about, well, I don't play Battlefield or, I don't play, whatever benchmarks or that I'm putting out here. That's not exactly the point. The point is to see, number one, the title. You can compare the engine. You can also compare whether it's on DirectX 11 or DirectX 12, the resolution. And the more educated you are on those specific things, it will help you to kind of narrow down, the types of games you're playing and whether or not, do you need to go higher than 3600? Maybe you do. Maybe you need to go with a 3600X or maybe a 3700X, but these are just little angles and things you need to consider as you're kind of reviewing through these. So here's the 1440p benchmarks. And again, I mean, if you look at the difference in performance from the two, now one thing you do want to also take into consideration is, and I did mention this earlier, is the 1% lows, because the 1% lows are mainly going to be, let me see if I can get this to work if I don't fuck this up. All right. Looks like it might work. All right. So let me do it this way. Nope, that is not working. Why is that? All right, fuck it. We won't do that then. All right. So the difference is going to be the distance between the 92 FPS and the 127. The larger the gap, the worse the more opportunity for stuttering and less smooth gameplay. Now that's not going to always be the case, but you want that gap to be as close and as small as possible. So those are things you also want to consider when you're looking at benchmarks. Like if you look at the Intel i5 9600K, look at the 78 FPS all the way up to 133. Look at how large that gap is. That means that you're going to be more prone to stutters during your gameplay at that resolution. So these are things that you want to take into consideration. This is, looks like I didn't get the screenshot done well enough, but this is, the threads. We're going to talk about threads later too, because that's something that Hardware Unboxed did not test, but Steve did test over at Gamers Nexus, turning off SMTP, which is actually, he got some really interesting results, but I'm not going to be showing those, but we will talk about it. Thank you for bringing it up, by the way. So this is the Shadow of the Tomb Raider benchmark results. And, oh, hey, Brian, welcome back to the stream. Obviously, when I took the screenshot, it ended up cutting off part of it. So, so anyways, this is the benchmark results for Shadow of the Tomb Raider. We're at 1080p. And when you look at the performance differences again between like the 3700X and the A700K, it's actually fairly close to the 9600K. I mean, for a $200 processor, guys, I mean, yes, it's 6 cores, but if you're just looking to build a gaming rig, this, they didn't have the 3600X at the time of this benchmark. I don't recall if Steve did. I don't think so. I think there are reviewers out now that do have it. I'm not entirely sure, but I can say that the 3800X has not been released. And the ones, if anybody does have a 3600X, those very few people have those, and those are probably people that went out and had to buy them themselves because they're hard to get right now for whatever reason. Don't know why AMD decided to do that. But I talked about this a little bit earlier. The overclockability on these CPUs is not as like what you would see from an Intel chip. So whether you get an X chip or not, meaning like a 3600 or a 3600X, the difference in the overclockability you're not going to see enough of a difference to probably warrant buying the X version. Just give you an example. The 3700X, there's no 3800X benchmarks, but when you compare the 3700X, which we'll get into later, to the 3900X, when you're focusing on gaming, there is just really not enough difference in the performance. So the 3800X, unless you're doing productivity, is not going to be worth that extra $70. Exactly. The difference isn't that big. So let's move on to the next one. So this is the 1440p benchmarks. And again, you will notice that the difference in the 1% lows on the 3700X is a much smaller gap there. But obviously the gap for the 9600K, it's not that bad actually. I mean, I don't want to hamper too much on it, but it's not too bad compared to what you're looking at the 3600. And again, title to title is going to be different, but still the 3600, I mean, for $200 is hanging in there. And the 9600K, the last time I checked, was running at $250. So still, the 3600 is definitely the way to go. And if, like I said, we're still looking for more BIOS updates and improvements. So the performance, I don't expect it to be a big, leap in performance. It could be. I'm not expecting it, but I do expect, a little bit more performance, anywhere from, 1 to maybe even 3%, but don't expect anything significant. For new games, the cores are going to count. Yes. And we're going to talk about that too, which, all right, I'll just mention this. I went with a 9700K for my gaming rig, but we'll talk about that later. But it is because of the cores and because of hyperthreading. We'll talk about that later. So here's, what game was this? Oh, okay, there we go. The Division. So all I had to do is click. Okay, so this is the Division 2. Again, look, I mean, the frame rates, this is insane. A $200 processor competing with a $330 processor, in the same family, obviously. I mean, again, if you're just gaming, that's crazy. That is crazy. I mean, it's just, and then of course, comparing it to an 8700K, which is a roughly $360 processor, which in some ways still hangs in there with the, 9700K and 9900K on some titles. I mean, that's, again, and also we're looking at 1080p performance. Obviously, when we go up to 1440p, the gap starts to close more. Isn't the 9700K the one without hyperthreading? Sorry for interrupting. No problem, Drago. You were my inspiration to investigate more about the 9700K, and yes, you are correct. And I'll talk about that a little bit more, maybe in the Q&A. Well, I think we can discuss that in the Q&A. But yes, you are correct. And it was because of you I investigated more, and one of the reasons I went with that processor for my main game rig. But I also got a 3700X too, and I'll talk about that more later. So, I mean, this is just crazy, guys, and it's beating out the 8700K on this benchmark. Of course, this is the 1440p, and obviously there's no 4K benchmarks here because obviously the higher you go, the more that gap closes. So it's not really entirely necessary. Here's Far Cry. Now, apparently the Far Cry engine, for whatever reason, doesn't do as well on AMD, but it's still not bad. I mean, it's still I wouldn't have a problem with it. I mean, yeah, it's not performing as well. I mean, the 9600K actually does really well on this particular title. And then obviously when we start to go up more, the gap starts to close a little bit more. So, but again, title to title. And, if you're maybe that's all the games you play. Maybe you just play all the Far Cry series, so if it's this Far Cry, it's probably going to be a consensus with, because they're probably using the same engine. You're probably going to see similar results. So just keep that in mind. World War Z, I mean, most of these titles I don't have experience with in playing. Some of them I'm interested in, but anyways, this is a newer title as well. And this one did okay. I mean, it's not too bad when you consider the frame rate. And again, I guess I should have mentioned this earlier. If you're playing a single player game, guys, and this is just my opinion. I mean, I guess this is a little biased. There really is no need to be going anything above, 144 for a single player game. I mean, even though it's a first person shooter, even if maybe you're doing co-op, the only time that you would want that 144 or higher is if you're doing multiplayer, even if you're not esports gaming, even if you're just, playing just for fun, then you probably would want that. And then that would matter. But if you're not, or you're not that anal about the frame rates, it's not a big deal. And this is still getting over that. So it's not an issue. And then here's the 1440p results. I mean, this little processor, I call it little, but this thing is a beast. And for $200, I mean, I can't harp on that enough. Here's Rage 2, another newer title I don't have any experience with, but look at the 1% lows on this. Yes, it is, it's not winning on the FPS, but I mean, when you compare it, 8 frame difference, but on the 1% lows, I mean, that is just amazing. That means that gameplay is going to be much, much smoother. Some single player games are not that smooth at 60 FPS if you have one. Yes, that's true, but you can tweak it depending if you put a frame cap, and whether or not you enable like fast sync versus VSync. There's a few things you can mess with, and we could talk about that more in the GPU section if necessary. Here's the 1440p results. Again, this is another situation where the gap starts to close because you start to get that balance of CPU and GPU, which I talked about earlier. And again, all these benchmarks are from Hardware Unboxed. Feel free to check out their channel if you haven't already. And if you can, subscribe to them, help them out, give them likes. These guys are amazing. They do a lot of good work for the community, and they've been very, very helpful. They are an invaluable resource to us, just like Gamers Nexus. So definitely check them out. And here's Hitman. This is a title I'm interested in playing at some point. No, it's okay. That's okay, Brian. I'm going to have a Q&A at the end of the CPU section, but if you can't make it, and if I can't address it right away, because I'm trying to stick to a schedule, post your question in the comment section below on YouTube, because the video will post on YouTube, and I'll get back to you and answer you on that. And if not, you can always come back to my live stream once I get back up and running and streaming again, which should be very soon. You can come and ask me questions, and I'll do my best to answer. So here's Hitman 2. Again, the 1% lows are really good. The frame rates, I mean, again, I'd be content with this. If I was building me a 1080p system, maybe even a 1440p system, where 1080p ultra settings, 1440p probably mid to high, this thing is going to do it. Now, as far as the future proofing on it, that's a whole other subject, which we'll get into later. But I mean, I can't even begin. All right, I think we've probably made our point. I've got enough benchmarks here. So there's a few other things that I want to show you guys. Let's see if I can so I know you guys probably aren't really interested in the production value. Well, I'm being presumptuous here. I shouldn't say that. Some of you may be, some of you may not. So sorry, that was probably not a good statement to make. So some of you may or may not be interested in the production side. So you may or may not be interested in these benchmarks, but I feel I should go ahead and cover them, but there's not as many as there are for the gaming. So we won't be spending a lot of time on them. But if you look here, I mean, you compare the 3600 versus the 2700X or even the 3700X in the Cinecore, and this is multi-core. I mean, again, we're talking a $200 processor versus, well, the 2700X is now $250, so that's a $50 difference. And you're comparing the 3700X, which is about $130 difference. I mean, the gap is honestly, if you were maybe going to go more production, I don't think that the difference for production the $50 difference when you look at the jump in the score from the 3600 to the 2700, I don't really think that's probably worth it. But again, that is going to depend on your build and your user case scenario. And this will be the multi-threading score, and obviously the multi-threading. And again, this is a 6-core, guys. I mean, this isn't even an 8-core. So that 6-core over here is hanging in with an 8-core 2700X, and of course an 1800X as well. So, I mean, that's just phenomenal. So this is the multi-core results. And I mean, obviously I never really used the 8700K too much for multi-core because I was mostly gaming on it. But I mean, the 8700K actually kind of surprised me. It doesn't do too bad. But the 3600, I mean, that's not bad at all. And then obviously if you guys are interested in doing like Adobe Premiere, this is obviously the lower the number in time, the faster, the better. And when you look at the 3600, I mean, the time on that is just, again, a $200 processor. I mean, you compare it obviously with like a 2700X or 1800X or 3700X. Again, just look at the numbers and then consider what you're going to be doing, and for the price that you're trying to target for, and also consider whether or not you're going to be, buying just temporarily and then maybe upgrade later for future proofing or whatever. And I remembered my water today, not like the other day. So I did fix a few mistakes, unlike my mic problem. Now here's some V-Ray benchmarks. Now this is stuff I don't mess with at all, but I feel it's fair just in case any of you guys are interested. But it does also kind of give you an idea just how powerful the CPU is when you compare it to other applications outside of gaming, versus, like an 8700K or 2700X or 3700X. Now this is actually pretty interesting because under full load for like a Blender, render, obviously you may not be doing this, but the power consumption is phenomenal on these CPUs. Because I mean, when you look at, if you take a CPU that is basically doing near the same performance, take the 3600 and you compare it to maybe the 2700X, maybe on a specific benchmarks, it's doing near the same performance, but you look at the difference in the actual power usage. If you look at the 2700X at the bottom, it's 221 versus the 3600 at 150. I mean, that is a huge step in power consumption as far as like, using less power. And I know some of you may or may not consider this, but you got to pay an electric bill. If you're running your system for, many hours, like me, when I'm running my dual system setup, the less power you're having to draw, that's cheaper electric bill. And believe me, I'm all about that. If I'm going to buy a laptop, it's going to be Gen 2. Yeah, I did mention, you might have missed it, but I won't be covering laptops and don't even have any data to really give any information on that. So I'm not trying to minimize your question or your statement or anything. It's just, I couldn't cover it even if I wanted to, just don't have any data on it. And this is, let's see. Oh, it's the same slide. Okay. So here's the Cinebench, and I thought we had covered this one already. Oh, no. Wait, let's see. This might be a duplicate from earlier. Oh no, these are the overclocking scores. Yeah, the power consumption, being that it's so much less, is very, very helpful on many fronts, because not only you're using less power, which is cheaper, you're getting to do more. And on top of that, that's less heat that you're going to have to be contending with to do some of the work you may need to do, which means that's also going to extend the life of your components. So that's one of the reasons why I use water cooling. It's not necessarily because I absolutely have to have it, but it's going to extend the life of my components. That, and also regularly cleaning, and also making sure that I have it on a battery backup so it's got clean power, kind of like wearing a condom. You don't know where that girl's been, so you want to protect yourself. So battery backup is like wearing a condom. Definitely want to be doing that. Maybe not on a low-end system, but if you got a mid or a high-end system, definitely consider it. So these are some of the overclocking results. And as I mentioned before, right now, and this could change with better BIOS updates and more tweaks and changes to the Ryzen Master, we're not really seeing a lot of performance increases with the overclocking and with PBO. So the PBO is, I guess I should have said this earlier, I'm going to strongly recommend, unless you're trying to be like one of those drag racers like Kingpin, just stick to PBO overclocking if you're going to be doing it at all. Because PBO, I should have probably played the other PBO video. I could do that in a minute. It basically is an algorithm. I played the first one, but there's another one also, but that was from 2nd gen, but it applies to 3rd gen. It basically monitors your SoC and your VRM temps and your main system, your main temps and your load line calibration. It monitors all of that to keep it within safe parameters. And if your temperatures, if all those are within safe parameters, then you'll actually get to boost higher and higher. But these are not actually getting the boosts that we were hoping for. So I just want to be open and honest with you guys. If you buy one of these chips and you're expecting to get a much higher overclock using PBO, and don't bother manual overclocking, like I said, just stick to PBO because it's much safer, much easier. And if you live in an area like I live where you have extreme temperature changes, as far as like seasons, then you're going to have multiple profiles for your overclock, and you're going to have to test a variety of different and have a whole bunch of different different profiles for manual overclocking. It's a nightmare. It takes sometimes weeks to get those things set up. It's not fun, and PBO takes care of all of it, and all the benchmarks results that have been tested with manual overclocking and PBO always wins. Always. There hasn't been a single person that's been able to do it, except maybe somebody like, Kingpin, or somebody who's doing like dry ice or LN2. Then that's a totally different ball game. And I should have mentioned that earlier. We're not covering that kind of stuff here. So if you're here for that, we're not doing it. Sorry. But you can see the differences in the results here versus the, PBO and auto overclock and then no overclock at all. We're not really seeing any advantage. Now, of course, that's with this particular slide. Here's another one. Again, we're not seeing enough of a difference to warrant even using it. Now, I should say this. I don't want to say PBO's garbage and you're never going to use it. There are going to be times where certain games, certain applications are going to benefit strongly from it. For example, my workstation, when I'm streaming, I run PBO because I'm running OBS, which strongly benefits from the encoding side of having an all-core overclock of 4.2 versus just doing a single core overclock of like 4.4. So again, it's going to be application based, and in some games, like I say, will perform better. You'll just have to test it for yourself. So here's the operating temperatures. And obviously this is something also you want to take into consideration. The top temperatures are your box cooler. This is the cooler that comes with the CPU. It's actually not bad. Right now, like the one I ordered today, I'm just going to use the air cooler for now. I'll get a water, I'll probably throw a water cooler on there later, but for now I'm just going to use a box cooler because I'm a little tight on money right now because all these upgrades and everything. But if you see the difference in, from the two, you're going to be fine with the box cooler. But you will have the potentiality, if you look at the boost clocks, if you go with better cooling, you will be able to boost higher. Because if you look at the stock setting box cooler, we're getting the lows on idle at 33. The highs are at 80. But if you look at the stock settings on a water cooler, which is the Corsair 2080, we're getting 4.125. It's not a huge jump in performance, but it is some. But we're at 30 on the idle and 62 on the load. So, and then of course, if you want to do the overclock, you're getting to 4.2, and we're at 31 to 68. So, I mean, just to kind of give you guys an idea, because in all honesty, if you're building and you're on a budget, don't worry about buying a water cooler right now. You can get that later if you even feel you need it at all. It will yield a little better performance. You know, you shave a little off here, shave a little off there, all that little extra little bit will stack up. But in all honesty, for like these lower end CPUs, and again, I hate to say that because this 3600 is a beast. I mean, if you want to do that, sure, it's your money. It's not, it's definitely not, I wouldn't call it a waste, but it's not really necessary. Okay, so we're done with the CPU benchmarks on the low end side. Let's get into the 3700X and the 3900X. Now, this is where things get to be a little disappointing, depending on what your expectations are. So real quickly, I mentioned this earlier. I went with the 3700X, but I didn't go with the 3700X for my main game rig. I wanted to, but I wanted a CPU that I could drop in that I know for the most part is going to last me. I'm only using it for gaming. That is all that CPU is going to be used for. I'm not doing any, I'm not surfing porn. I'm not doing any production or anything like that. So it's just a gaming system. I don't even have a browser on it. So at that point, there was no reason for me to get, one of the newer AMD chips, even though they perform better. Or not better, but even though there's actually, on some games, they're going to perform close and some games not so good. That's one of the reasons I also went with the 9700K. But I'm not trying to push the Intel on this front. I'm just trying to give you an example of the reason, because I see a lot of these reviewers. I'm a little scatterbrained here. I'm trying to stay on track, but there's a lot of reviewers out there that are heavily pushing the new AMD chips for gaming. And I'm not saying they're wrong, but I would say the way they're presenting it, even the ones that are not necessarily paid reviewers, because some of them it's kind of skeptical on, they're not really seeing all the angles. And I'm not saying that I am, but the thing is if you're just going to build a single system, you're not going to have any more than just the one system, and you're going to game on it, even if you're not really going to do much productivity, then yes, I'm going to recommend you go with an AMD Ryzen 3rd gen system or third gen chip, and any of them, whether you go 3600, 3700X or 3900X. Well, 3900X, we need to talk a little bit more about that. But somewhere within that 3600 to the 3700X, somewhere within that, then yeah, that I would definitely recommend that. But if you have like multiple systems as I do, and each have a different task of what I use them for, that's a different scenario. And if you just want the best balls to the wall gaming system that's going to perform the best, you're not going to use it for anything else, and you have the money, Intel is the way to go. And to go a little step further on that, I'm going to recommend the 9700K over the 9900K, which is good for a few reasons. Number one, it's cheaper. And number two, on a lot of benchmark results, and I can show those a little bit later, it clearly outperforms the 9900K. And a lot of it is because of the hyperthreading. Now, there was some tests done a few years ago where you had, reviewers turning off hyperthreading on some of the older CPUs, such as the 6700K, the 8700K, and they were actually trying to find out if hyperthreading was hurting games. And if you go and look at those reviews, it shows that in some ways it doesn't affect it at all, and in some ways it actually hurt games. But those reviews are not exactly valid now, because the 9700K it's an 8-core processor, and because of the way the architecture is done, and I'm not going to sit here and pretend I'm an engineer and that I fully understand it, because I don't, but just because of the way it works, it clearly wins out on gaming, even outperforming the 9900K in a lot of situations. Now, there will be certain situations where the 9900K will outperform, but I found more often than not during my benchmark results research that the 9700K outperformed. In some ways, it was just a marginal increase, and in some was like a pretty substantial increase, like 10 FPS, but it usually wasn't any higher than maybe 10 FPS. So we were looking at anywhere from an even match to 10 FPS higher. And we're also, and this is where Drago kind of helped me out when he was pointing this out on one of my streams, it runs a little bit cooler because of the hyperthreading. Now, I was going to try to do a demonstration of hyperthreading, but time is short. But hyperthreading depending on the scenarios, can cause your CPU to run hotter, which is one of the reasons why the 9900K runs so hot, because it also has hyperthreading. But here's the thing with the 9900K, if you were going to be doing gaming and production, that would be the reason why you'd go with the 9900K. But now that we have the Ryzen chips, there is no reason to be buying the 9900K if you're gaming and doing production. There is no reason to be buying it. At that point, you really should be going with the 3900X. You might even be content with going with the 3700X. And as we look at these benchmarks and we start getting into the production benchmarks, you'll kind of see and kind of start putting things together for your budget on what is going to be the best choice for you. Now, I'm sorry if it seemed like I was making it all about me, guys. I don't want it to come off that way, but I'm just trying to give you a scenario because I found it very frustrating. A lot of reviewers out there just saying, yeah, don't buy the Intel 9th Gen, just go with the Ryzen. I mean, I guess in one scenario, like let's take my scenario again. Okay, so I'm buying this 9700K, right? Well, I know right now I'm kind of pigeonholing myself that I'm not going to really be able to upgrade it. Meaning when I go to upgrade, I'm going to have to, well, not completely. I'll be able to probably reuse my RAM because of the type of RAM I bought. I did future-proof that, but my motherboard and processor is not future-proof. So I expect to get 4 years out of this processor, and that's fine, because what I was hoping to do is, honestly, what I was targeting was getting a 3900X, using that for 3 to 4 years, popping it out, and if they were still able to use the 5th or 6th gen processors on the motherboard that I was going to go with, then I could just do an easy upgrade then. But the thing is DDR5 is, I'm getting ahead of myself. That's another thing. Okay, I'm not going to talk about that. Let's just get back on track. Sorry, there's just so much information to discuss. All right, so let's talk about the benchmarks with the 3700X, 3900X. We'll talk about the other stuff later. Sorry about that, guys. So as you can clearly see, there's not a big difference between the 3900X and 3700X when you're comparing gaming benchmarks, but it still does perform really, really well. And when you compare it with the 9700X and 9700X and 9900K, 9700K and 9900K, I was saying X, there's not a big difference. However, something to note, the difference in the 1% lows, the gap between the two is smaller. So theoretically, you should get smoother gameplay, theoretically. But according to the testers, they didn't notice any difference. Here's the 1440p. The gap doesn't close as much as what we would normally expect, or at least what I'm used to. But again, when you compare the 3700X and the 3900X, is it worth that extra $170? I mean, if you're just gaming, I don't think so. But again, to each user case. And here's Battlefield, the 1080p. Here's the 1440p. And I know some of you guys might say, if I'm going too fast, don't worry, you can go back, watch, don't have to watch the whole stream. You can go back, look at the archive, and you can pause it, or go watch the benchmarks from Hardware Unboxed. I definitely encourage supporting them if you can. Here's a shot of the Tomb Raider. The shot of the Tomb Raider didn't do so well, but I suspect, and I could be wrong, because of DirectX 12. And I will admit, even on my A700K with my 2080 Ti, shot of the Tomb Raider, I could get anywhere from 70 to 80 FPS, but that game if I use DirectX 11, it does much better. Same with Rise, but DirectX 12 is just such a hog for resources. Now the gap obviously starts to close, but again, not as good as what we would like. The Division 2, and again, we're starting to get into, I guess, like first-person, third-person shooter games. And again, do you need to be going above 144 FPS? Actually, this is a multiplayer game, so I guess, yeah, you might. I don't play this, but I think this is I don't think this is just a single player. Okay, correct me if I'm wrong. And again, here we notice that the gap on the performance is actually closing. And here's the Far Cry Dawn. There's the 1440p. And there's the World War Z. So, in my opinion, I think if you're going for a mid-range system, mid-range to high-end, and you want to go with one of these new Ryzen chips, and you're going to be doing more than just gaming, the 3700X is probably the target CPU. The 3600X might not be a bad choice either once we see those benchmarks. Because the mid-range could be a lot broader. It's the low range and the high end, high end or extreme. Those are kind of cut and dry. Obviously you want to go with the best CPU you can get. And on the budget, you want to go with the cheapest, best CPU you can get. But the mid-range, there's a lot more flexibility. So on your budget, as far as where you want to maybe spend your money. This is one of the reasons why I also mentioned earlier, you don't really need to be concerned about budgeting a water cooler if that's something you're used to, because you could probably wait on that because water coolers are expensive. So here's Rage 2. This is on Vulkan, obviously. And there's a 1440p. Apparently, and I don't know, I haven't played Hitman, but Hitman for some reason, doesn't do that great on the AMD chips. I mean, it's still playable. I mean, it's not like absolutely terrible, but you do see a bit of a drop off. And this is a single player game. Boy. Even if I was playing on my gaming monitor, which I could, I'd be fine with that. Honestly, that Prism cooler is pretty good for. Yes, it is. Yeah, that's what I'm going to use for mine. I bought my 3700X as an HTPC system. I'm going to do everything on it. I'm going to be doing production and gaming, but it's kind of like a side system. And I think, okay, so that's enough of the benchmarks, I think. And again, you can either go back and look at my stream or go straight to the horse's mouth, and look at Hardware Unboxed's full review. I definitely recommend checking them out just in general. I try to help support them as much as I can. We don't really need to look at temperatures or power draw or anything like that, since we've already kind of covered that. I think we can go ahead and just, if you guys want to go ahead and start throwing out questions, we can kind of do like a Q&A discussion, and we'll, we can open it up and, do like 10-15 minutes. And if there's not a lot, then we can go ahead and start moving into motherboards, and we'll start discussing that. Any questions, comments? I mean, we can jump right into motherboards if you guys want. Let's see here. All right, we'll go ahead and do that then. So what I'm going to do, okay. So I'm going to give you a breakdown of my understanding with this launch in regards to motherboard choices. And I've done a lot of research. It's going to save you guys a lot of time. Okay, you're curious about motherboards? Okay, cool. All right, so unless you are doing high production work, meaning maybe you're working for a company and you're doing serious video editing and encoding that warrants the use of PCIe 4th gen, you do not need a 570X X570 motherboard. You do not need it. And here's a few reasons why I'm going to recommend not buying it aside from that. So Robert Hallock confirmed that 4th gen Ryzen, meaning the next generation, is not going to support DDR5. So what that means is whatever motherboard you buy now, if you get a good high-end quality board, even though it's not an X570, maybe like a good B450 board or an X470 board, the 300 series is a little shaky there. I would still recommend the 400 series because of pricing and because of reliability. You should be able to upgrade fairly easily. But when we start talking 5th and 6th gen, Robert said that they designed their chips to where you should be able to take that chip, drop it in to the board you have now, and it should work with, obviously, with a BIOS update. The thing is DDR5 is kind of around the corner, but not exactly. He did confirm that Ryzen 4th Gen will not support DDR5 memory. So what that means is if you buy a board today and you're planning on building a Ryzen 3rd Gen system, if you get and I've got a list of recommended motherboards, I'm going to show you guys in a minute. If you get one of those boards, you should be good to go if you want to upgrade to 4th Gen. 5th Gen, that starts to get a little iffy. Probably so, but again, that starts to get a little iffy. But here's the thing. If you do buy an X570 board now and you're not using the M.2, you're paying all this extra money for technology you're not going to be using, because PCI 4th Gen for the average consumer probably won't be standardized for another 2 to 4 years, give or take, So by that time, let's say it's on the high end, it's 4 years. By that time, a new generation will be out, whether they're on 5th or 6th gen. A new chipset motherboard will be out, and at that time, it would probably be better to just go with a new motherboard at that time, instead of spending all this money on technology that you're not going to be using now, or probably in the next couple of years. Again, I'm not clairvoyant here, but there is a general consensus on this. And, I already knew this even before I listened to other reviewers. That's why I went with an X470 board. I'm not going to use PCIe 4th Gen. By the time I do, it'll be time to get a new motherboard anyways. So with that being said, and don't get me wrong, I don't want, like I said, if you're going to be doing video production, or maybe you run a YouTube channel and you want that extra M.2 SSD speed and you're going to do RAID and all that stuff, then yeah, it's worth it. Buy it. But you're not also considering the extra money for the board, but you're also going to have to buy those M.2 SSDs. Those things are almost twice as much as a regular M.2 SSD. So that really starts getting into heavy production. And this stream was supposed to focus more on the gaming side, even though we're going to discuss production. So with that being said, let's talk about motherboards that I would recommend that you probably should target. Now, if you're going to be building a 3600 to a 3700X, you could go with a B350 or X370 board. However, I would strongly recommend trying to lean more towards going towards an X or a B450 or an X470, mainly because of the prices. Because when I actually bought up, let me go ahead and do this now. Give me 1 second. I'm going to bring these charts up. Now, I know you guys may not shop on Newegg, and that's okay. And like I said, I'm not here to necessarily promote Newegg, but I'm just using this as a reference to give you guys an idea of what you can do. Okay. So this link will be in the description below, and I'm going to try my best to break down this chart, and you guys probably can't read that very well. So let me, 1 second. Okay. Is that being legible enough for you guys? Hopefully so. Again, the link will be in the description. If it's not there now, I'll get it there later. So this is a motherboard chart that has confirmation on whether or not whatever chip you decide to go with is going to work with your board. Okay. Now at the top here, let me see if I can get these annotations to work, because this shit is just so congested. Okay, they are working, but let me change the color. Okay, so at the top here, you guys can see there's the 3950X. It's all the CPUs, you know, from left to right. And obviously the right end being the lowest end CPU. And then as we go down, we're going to start seeing, give me 1 second. As we go down, we're going to start seeing the listings of all the boards to the left there. And this chart starts off with the listings of the X570s. Now, it's got all the major titans. It's got ASRock, ASUS, MSI, Gigabyte, and I think BioStar. Yeah, BioStar. Nothing against BioStar, but I don't have any experience with them. But not only does it have the X570 boards, it also has the X470, B450 boards, and all the vendors. And if you look at the legend up at the top here, it basically explains that anything in green, you're good to go. Anything in yellow, it's kind of like, you better have some damn good cooling, or you better plan to bump up that cooling. You're kind of on the edge. Anything in red, stay away from it. Anything in gray hasn't been tested yet. So as we go down, you know, all these, you can basically go across and try to reference what CPU you're targeting, and then whatever board you're interested in. Now, I will say this. When you start going with one of these older boards, there are a few that are going to be really good budget and actually have pretty good reviews. And then there are some that are going to be like, you know, maybe not so. And this is, I'm trying to do my best to present you with the best point in the right direction. But at the end of the day, you guys are still going to have to do a little bit of legwork on the right motherboard. But if you want to ask me about a specific motherboard after you've done your homework and you want me to check it out, I'm open to doing that. It's not a problem. So obviously we'll go further down where I'm actually scrolling up. And now we get into like the X370 and 350 boards. And as you notice, we start to get, you know, less and less in the green and more in the red, yellow, and of course gray. Now, another thing that you're going to want to do when you're researching your boards is you want to go to the manufacturer, make sure that they have BIOS updates and that board is actually going to be updated to support the new 3rd gen. And one other thing too, I have a slide that was sent out from AMD that if you get a motherboard and it doesn't have any kind of flashback feature where, and this is your first Ryzen chip and you have no way of updating the BIOS, you can contact AMD. They will send you out a placeholder CPU where you can install it into your board, and it'll allow you to update the BIOS. It's like an actual CPU. It's some kind of, I forget what the terminology that they use, but it's just like a clone CPU, just enough so you can update your BIOS, and then you need to mail it back so they can send it out to other people. I don't know if there's a fee for that. Actually, I think it's free. You just have to send them your receipt for your chip. So yeah, I did check it. It's free, so you don't have to worry about that. So anyways, these are the listings. The link is in the description below. Go through it and check it out. Now, the next thing I've done for you guys is I went ahead and did a little bit of legwork for you. And I have done, I made on Newegg, a list of boards. I went through that list that I just showed you, and I picked out several boards that are in the green, good to go. And I went ahead and made a wish list so you can go and see, and then you can go ahead and look at the pricing. And let me go ahead and set it to lowest price. Okay, so for example, this B350 board here, it's an ASUS. It's $77. You get one of those, slap yourself in there a $200 3600, and then go get yourself some RAM, which we got some budget RAM options as well. And you've just got yourself a budget system for like $400. I mean, of course, you still need a graphics card and other things, but the core, I guess, if you will. So, and again, like I said, make sure you still cross-reference these boards to the chart, because there may be updates from the time that I did it that may have changed or whatever. But like I said, I went ahead and made a list, and you'll notice some of these boards are more expensive than others. And I did mention this in the beginning, so I'll reiterate it again. The better quality board you get, specifically when you're talking about the VRMs, and this is one of the reasons why Steve at Hardware Unboxed, when he does motherboard reviews, he focuses a lot on VRMs, is because the better quality VRM that you have, the better quality the board is going to be in regards to support, providing power to the CPU that is going to, for one, provide you a longer lifespan for both your CPU and your board, but that's not the focus, but also allow you to get a cleaner power source to your CPU that's going to allow it to perform better and have better clock speeds, and also is going to affect your temperatures as well. So even though you may want to get a budget board for $77, that's okay. If you're building a low-end system, you're not too concerned. You're probably not going to be too concerned about overclocking or whatever. That's okay. But when you start getting into like mid-range and high-end, you definitely want to pay more attention to the VRMs and things like that. I wouldn't ignore it on low-end either. You still want to try to get the best for your money. But like, if you paid $77 for a board like this and get yourself a 3600 or even a 3700X, and 2 years from now you decide you want to upgrade or whatever, you didn't really lose much because you're not paying out that much. Not like Intel. And Drago and I discussed this one night, where that's one of the main things that's pissed me off about Intel, because every time you want to upgrade from generation to generation with Intel, you got to go buy a whole new motherboard. And it's not cheap at all. So that's another, big pro to, going with AMD. Well, I typed up a storm that exceeded Twitch limits, basically explaining why I have no comments. Oh, okay. That's a bummer. Sorry about that. Oh, by the way, guys, real quick interjection. For those of you who are on YouTube, I know some of you guys know, if you are so inclined, please follow me on Twitch, because my days are numbered on YouTube. In fact, I'm going to be leaving YouTube a lot sooner than I thought, like real soon. So if you are interested in continuing watching my stream, I'm going to be a Twitch only streamer very soon. All right, back on track. So let's look at the B450 and X470 boards. Now this starts getting more into the mid-range, and with the mid-range or even high-end, for example, and let me go ahead and put it to budget. So let's set it at lowest price. So you can get yourself, and a lot of the guys on Discord on Hardware Unboxed, I've been discussing with them, they're all going with this board here. A lot of them, they're going with this B450 Tomahawk. This thing is selling like hotcakes. $115. Okay, thank you, Drago. I appreciate it. I mean, this thing is $115. Get yourself one of those, slap yourself in whatever CPU you want. You could even probably go with, I have it let me see if, I don't know if this would do the 3900X. Let's check real quick. That's an Asus. Don't remember. I know it works because that's what a lot of the guys are going with. I'm not sure which one of this is on here, but if you notice, I mean, anything from a 3800X down, you're good. Now, if you want to go 3900X, that Tomahawk might be better to go with a better quality board, like a 4700, or excuse me, X470. A little scatterbrain. Now, this is an honorable mention here. I mean, obviously, we're starting to make a jump a big jump in budget on the boards, but now we're starting to push more towards higher mid-range to more high-end, and we're starting to push the $200 mark. So that, you know, the Tai Chi is an honorable mention. This one is probably good. There's two Tai Chis. There's the Tai Chi, which is this one here, and there's the Tai Chi Ultimate. The Ultimate comes with, the only difference is the Ultimate comes with a 10 gigabit Ethernet port. And at the end of the day, if you need that, just buy yourself an add-in card and go that route, because at least with that, if you decide to upgrade later, you can take that card to your next upgrade. Whereas if you spend the extra $50, you know, you're going to lose it when you go to upgrade, and you may not even need it. So again, save yourself $50 if you want to go that route. Now for mine, because I want upgradability, I went with the Asus Crosshair 7 Hero, which is out of stock. There's two versions. There's a Wi-Fi version and there's a regular version. The Corsair 7 Hero, the non-Wi-Fi, if it's in stock, you can usually pick that up anywhere from $220 to $240. I got mine for, I think, $220. So I paid $20 extra. But the reason I paid $20 extra is this is the best X470 board you can get. There's no arguing it. Now, Buildzoid, he will argue it and say no, just go with the gigabyte board, which I think I have here. Yes, this one here for $239. Again, you have to consider the price. If you can get the Crosshair 7 Hero for $220 versus $240 from the Aorus Gigabyte, because they're both very, very close, go with the Asus, because the main issue that I had, and if you follow DeBauer, he breaks it down. I mean, you can't go wrong with either or. They're both good boards, but I'm going to strongly push towards the Asus, because number one, if you plan to raid, which you may or may not want to do, you have that opportunity to do that. But my biggest issue with the Gigabyte board is the BIOS. It is garbage compared to the Asus. And depending on what you may or may not be doing with PBO and your memory and things like that, the Gigabyte is just not worth it, and it is more expensive. But if you see that this board, the Asus, is more expensive and you're trying to cut corners, then yeah, just go ahead and go with the Gigabyte. But I was able to get mine for $220. So if you can get it cheaper like that, like I was able to, then yeah, go the Asus. And unless you need Wi-Fi, go without, just get, don't even bother with the Wi-Fi. But if you need it, the Wi-Fi version is a lot more expensive. I don't know if it's on this list here. Yes, it is. It's like $50 more, $50 to $55 more just for Wi-Fi. Just like the ASRock Tai Chi Ultimate, if you look here, is $170 for that extra gigabit Ethernet. So depending on what your use case is. But like I said, if you're going to go with the Ethernet, get the PCIe card. The Wi-Fi, depending on what your needs are, it might be better to go with the, with the actual Wi-Fi version instead of getting a Wi-Fi USB dongle. I don't use Wi-Fi very much for a desktop system, so I honestly don't know what the performance difference would be and whether it'd be worth it to get this board or just get you the $220 board and slap in a USB. But I don't know what you guys would be doing. I don't use Wi-Fi on my desktops ever. So, and here's the BioStar board that's on the list there, but this thing's $400 and it's not even in stock and it doesn't have any real reputable reviews. I just threw it in there just in case you guys want to check it out. But the majority of the boards that are probably recommended if you're going to go B450 or X470 are here. Again, cross-reference those to the listings that I have here and you should be good to go. Just keep in mind that the better your VRMs, the better quality as far as your throughput on your heat and the power for your CPU, which should allow you to boost higher, which should yield better performance. And again, adding a good water cooler, again, we're talking more mid-range builds here, even going to high, also is going to have, even though these little things are just negligible increases in performance. When you add a little bit here, you add a little bit there. I don't know if you guys follow MMA fighting, but MMA fighters are kind of the same way. They add a little here, a little there. And even though they're little breadcrumbs of performance increases, the more you add, it starts to add up. It's like maybe it's a penny. Okay, fine. It's only a penny, but you add up a few more pennies. You got maybe you got another 3 to 5% more performance. You're milking your money, milk what you've paid for because the performance is there if you're willing to put the time in for it. All right. I don't know. Let me see if there's anything else on the motherboard end that we need to cover. I did mention DDR5. Oh, real quick about DDR5. From the research I've done, exactly. If you win by an inch, it's a win. Unlike what happened to Ben Askren this weekend. Poor guy. He got KO'd. I like Ben Askren, but anyways, I'm digressing there. So DDR5. From my research, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm not clairvoyant on this, the DDR5 DIMMs, it'll eventually happen when they get released, will be able to fit and should be compatible in older boards that are DDR4 compatible and DDR3. Because the memory controller, it's going to be built into the CPU. The question is, and again, I'm not an engineer, guys, I don't know it all. And I've tried to research as best I can. The question is let's say, for example, I've got the X470 board, and let's say 6th gen comes out and it supports DDR5. And I can go ahead and my board actually is going to have enough good VRMs where I can pop in a 6th gen processor. Will my board be able to handle the throughput of DDR5? So that's a question that I don't know. And I'm sorry, I don't have all the answers, but it's just something to consider. That's another reason why I'm like, is it worth it to get an X570 board? But I will say the X570 boards, they do have extra layers in their PCB buildup. So that may be one of the reasons why they're doing it. I don't know. They haven't said. But these are just things to consider. But I think by the time I go to upgrade to DDR5 and upgrade my CPU, I'm probably going to need to upgrade a motherboard. And at that time, at least for my gaming rig, because that's the only one that's probably going to, be compromised, then, I don't know. It's really difficult on that front to do any future proofing. So, and there are things we can future proof. And like I said, we'll talk about that a little bit more later. But I think we're done with the motherboard discussion. If you guys have questions, comments, things, we can go ahead and get into that now, just on motherboards or whatever. We can do a little CPU, but then we're going to go ahead and move into RAM and we'll discuss that. That'll be short. There's not a lot to discuss about RAM. I mean, there are things to cover, but nothing, it should be much shorter.
Boy.
Well, I guess I'll check the text block. Okay, so there's not that much for me to say. I've ordered the 3700X now with a 60-day open return paired with the ASUS Prime. Okay, yeah. And that is one of the boards on this listing here. That was good to go. Replace that miserable i5 7500K. For some reason, I knew you had a 7th gen, but I always forgot whether it was the 76 or 70, which version it was. It was honestly a toss up between the 3700X, 3800X, and 9700K. And due to, yes, your pricing, of course, it was way cheaper than buying a Z390, a cooler and more expensive 9700K. And like you, slightly disappointed by the game. Yeah. But it's still well within. Yeah, totally. And I'm wanting to compliment your 1080 Ti, which it does. Yes. Yeah. I think you're going to be fine. And I mean, again, I don't know what other things you do on your computer besides just gaming, but I'm sure you probably do other things. And it sounds like you just have the one PC. And if that's the case, like I said, if I just had the one PC, that's what I'd be doing. I'd be with the 3700X. But I'm a bachelor. I have the luxury of being able to buy toys and have other things, so I can do this. And no, I'm not rich. I just cut corners where I can. Yeah. And so, yeah, that's definitely the way to go. like my HTPC system. So I have 3 main systems, guys. Actually, I'm gonna have 4 now. So I have Skynet, which is my 6700K, and that's my HTPC system that I'm using now. That's going to be my test system now. I'm going to be using that as a kind of like a test bench for software and programs and apps and things like that. And so the 3700X is going to be my HTPC system. Now that system gets used the most out of all my systems. And then I have my game system. That is only when I'm gaming and I'm streaming. So if I'm going to game and stream, that system is just for gaming. I don't even have a web browser on it. And since I have a capture card, all the load, everything that is on that, as far as CPU and GPU usage, memory and everything, is just to push the game. I don't have to worry about resources for my system to stream. That's why I have the secondary machine. Yes, it's a luxury. I know I'm spoiled, but I spoil myself because no one else will. So with that being said, the stream rig that I have, I still am using that as a stream work machine. And that machine is only running when I'm streaming or when I'm doing my work. But my HTPC system is always running. I'm always doing something on it, whether I'm doing some work on it, whether I'm setting up a game profile or testing a game, watching a movie, surfing porn, because we got to have our porn. It's always up and running. So that system is going to be used a lot. Now, I probably could have gone with the 3600, wouldn't have been an issue. But the thing is I wanted something that was going to allow me to still do a little bit of light gaming, even at 1440p. So I can, do tests and whatnot. And I'm going to be using it for kind of like a secondary game stream machine just for streaming retro games, because I don't feel it's necessary in regards to power to be running a high-end game rig to play retro games that don't utilize that much power. And I did test playing kind of a retro game on my stream rig and running the game and streaming on the same machine, and it does it, but there were some problems that were just kind of annoying me, and I'm going to have an HTPC system anyways, so I thought I'd just go that route. I'm not saying it's the most efficient way to be spending money, and yes, I know I'm spoiled, but like I said, I got to spoil myself because no one else will, and it's just one of my hobbies.
Boy.
It's one of the benefits of being a bachelor. Freedom. Forgot to mention that the 3800X got knocked out due to the power requirements. Yes, my case is just fine when it comes to cooling, and that 105 watt looked pretty spooky. Well, when you look at the comparisons of the 3900X and the 3700X, and especially if you're not doing high production, it's like, why even bother with the 3800X? I mean, that's why I didn't bother with it. I mean, I was even on the fence on whether I should even go with the 3700X for my HTPC, but I wanted 8 cores. If they would have had a 3600X 8 core, I would have gone with that, but it's only 6 core. So I kind of wanted to go ahead and go with the 8 core, but I saw no reason to wait for the 3800X, and 3900X is, and if the 3900X had performed a little bit, well, according to some benchmark reviewers, the 3900X, when compared to a 9700K or even a 9900K, the performance in games is anywhere from 15, it's anywhere from 15 to 10%, as far as like Intel is beating it out by still 10 to 15%. That's still not bad. It's definitely not bad. And, I was on the fence. Yeah, that 3600 is legit. $200. You can't beat it. But considering it is just used for gaming, the 9700K was just a no-brainer, especially at $360. Let me pull that up real quick. Hopefully I don't think I'll give out too much of my information. I don't think so. So yeah, I got it for $364, no tax, no shipping, because I bought it from a third party, but it's brand new. So it was like, it's kind of a no-brainer. And yes, I had to get the motherboard too. And yes, I'm not going to have any future proofing, if Ryzen does take over, but I want the best game performance, and I don't want to be upgrading anymore. I just want to build my system and game and stream, because this is the second time this year. Well, not this year, but within a year, I've had to upgrade, and I like doing it, but not this close. And I know I've talked about this, but why, I had an 8700K, and even though it's not like a big jump in, as far as performance to the 9700K, the reason why I didn't go with the 9700K to begin with was it wasn't released at the time. It was the 9900K. And when I was comparing it, there were heat issues with the 9900K. The price was like more than double. And the 8700K I actually got it on sale. I got mine on sale for $350 or something like that. And then it went back up, which was kind of weird. They're always fluctuating. So I was content with that. And yes, I did prematurely sell my gaming system because I saw benchmarks before the Ryzen 3rd Gen was released. But what was interesting about that is even though I saw that the gaming benchmarks were a little disappointing, I already had a backup plan, which was this, because I knew that I was able to sell it and I got a good chunk of change for my gaming rig because I took out, and mind you guys, I did not sell my 2080 Ti. I still have it. I just slapped in an older card that I no longer need it, and I sold it to some kid that, was going to game on it, and he's happy. I've been giving him tech support on it, and he's totally happy with the system. Yeah, that's insane, dude. That's almost $500 for a 9700K. Yeah, there's no reason to buy that. Just get yourself the Ryzen 3rd Gen for sure. But the 8700K seemed like the no-brainer at the time, and I decided that if I was going to go Ryzen 3rd Gen for the game rig, I was actually shooting for the 3900K or X, excuse me. KX, all these damn letters. But since it kind of fell short on the gaming, and since I'm only doing gaming on it, and since that processor is really meant to be kind of a hybrid CPU, meaning gaming and production, I didn't see the point. And the 3700X, even though it's a good value, and I went ahead and got one for my HTPC, I didn't want to shortchange my gaming rig. I wanted to put for the most part, the best CPU I can put in there that's going to last me at least the next 4 years. And considering that, let me guys go ahead and show you. I know we haven't gotten into the RAM yet. So actually, hold on a second. So you know what? Let's go ahead and move into the RAM. Then we'll get back into this, because I am kind of digressing here. So let me, there's not a lot to discuss, but we do need to discuss it. So.
Boy.
Exactly. No hyper-threading security issues. And I'm going to discuss future-proofing as well about the whole, even though AMD is probably going to take over Intel, that's happening. It's that's inevitable. And even though I'm going with Intel now, the thing is developers, a good rock-solid games take years to develop, okay? And mediocre games take usually a minimum a year to two. So even if they're developing now, with AMD's new technology, by the time games start taking advantage of the more cores and any kind of hyper-threading, in regards to the way it is now, because it's changed, it'll be time for me to upgrade anyways. So I'm still going to be benefiting and the problem with it, the reason why that is because most developers develop around Intel. And why? Because Intel's been the king of the mountain for so long. But now that AMD has proven that they're a contender, that's going to change. That's why consoles are now moving towards AMD. So I'll be good for the next 3 to 4 years with this CPU, and I will be pretty much screwed on any kind of future-proofing upgradability. But that's my choice considering what I'm using it for and considering what I paid. I'm okay with it. I gave it a lot of thought. Believe me, this was not an easy decision. I sat on this for probably a good week, and I can't tell you how many benchmarks I watched for the last few days when they launched, just going through it, just driving myself crazy, just trying to figure it out. But I'm content. The 9700K for my use case was the better way to go. Okay, let's talk about RAM. All right, so Robert Hallock, 509 in Canada. Jeez. Okay. I want to mention something that Robert Hallock talked about. If I can bring it up here in my notes. Okay, here we go. Now I'm not going to play this whole video, but I'm going to play a couple of parts of it. And I probably should have played part of this for the motherboard section. So I'll play that part as well. So let me go ahead and play the motherboard section first, since we're just now going into the RAM. Okay, we can start it there. Okay, so this is another, this is a stream that was done with Robert Hallock, I believe last week. Let me check the date on this. I think this was last week. This is the 27th. So yeah, well, a little more than that. But anyways, he discusses, you know, why you're going to be safe using an older board, and that you're not necessarily having to go with a X570. It's not that long.
Get with the new Ryzen, whether like on a B350 or 450 or X370, you know, kind of across the board. And then everyone's shouting at me to ask you guys about 3rd gen Threadripper.
Okay, I'll tackle the motherboard question first. So, you know, behind the scenes, one of our engineering efforts is to design, when you build a socket, you have to also define the thermal and electrical standards that go into that socket. And that's a set of minimum requirements that every motherboard has to follow. And so when you have a new generation of CPU that uses less power than the old one and has better thermals than the old ones, that means the same old sockets offer more headroom than they did previously. So there is no performance difference between, you know, 300 series chipsets, 400, 500, and that's by design. That we planned for that 5 years ago when we started designing these socket standards, and I think that's an incredible foresight from our engineers to build that into the plan. And then on the topic of 3rd gen Threadripper, first of all, it will happen.
Boy.
Thank you, Drago. Yeah, I muted it just in case, so I wasn't like breathing into the mic. Darth Vader. So okay, so here's him discussing the memory situation.
This date, and it was just a good marketing date to align to say it symbolizes the whole company effort on 7 nanometer, July 7th, availability for these 2 brand new awesome products to come together.
I'm short a little bit.
Like you just like add 7.
Okay, here we go. It's a little off.
There's some questions and people are kind of asking, and maybe Gordon can actually kind of phrase this better, but people are asking about RAM speeds and overclocking options. So one is the RAM speeds between the X470, the B450, and the X570.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I think I can tackle that one. So,
that was him.
so we have done plug and play memory in our labs set up to around 4400. Just stick in the kit, load the profile, and go. Our partners like MSI have done up to DDR4 5100 on air, but you know, I know there are people out there trying to piece together on PC Part Picker this hypothetical system that they're going to buy, and they're wondering what RAM should I get. I really do think that the performance sweet spot, price performance, is going to be like DDR4 3600, C15 or C16. So you know, take that to the bank. That's kind of the memory kit that you really want to buy for the price performance. But so what makes memory overclocking better? One, we have an all new memory controller in 3rd gen Ryzen that is a big help. We have new firmware for that memory controller. That's a big help. We've done a lot of BIOS work, not just in this generation of product, but coming off of 1st gen and 2nd gen, memory compatibility has progressively improved quite a lot. And then lastly, X570 has revised motherboard layouts, more PCB layers, different trace lengths and routing. And when you put all of that together, yeah, X570 is probably going to give you the best memory overclocking, but we're not talking about standing on the shoulders, heads and shoulders above here, right? An X470 motherboard or a B450 motherboard is still going to give you a great experience because the majority of that overclocking benefit comes from the memory controller and the memory controller firmware that we provide.
Okay, that's pretty much it. And I'm not muted that time. I caught it. And thank you, by the way. Okay, so I guess there is a bit to discuss about this. I have links in the description below in regards to the memory, so I'll be referencing that, talking about that here. So for those of you who are aware, Ryzen first gen had some issues with memory, and everybody was kind of after this gold mine of memory known as Samsung B die. And that also transitioned, was relevant for Ryzen second gen. Ryzen second gen got better, their memory, I guess the controller, again, I'm not an engineer, but from my understanding, it got better. And again, it's getting better even with this third gen. I cannot confirm whether or not Samsung B die is still going to be the best for Ryzen third gen. It was relevant for Ryzen first and second gen. I would imagine that it's probably still going to be very beneficial, but there's a problem. So Samsung B die memory, it's very expensive, number one. Number two, Samsung has discontinued it. And the announcement for that, when they said they were going to discontinue their production of B die memory, I believe they announced that in May. And the link in the description below about that news, whatever. And when I found that out, I was like, oh shit. So I immediately bought myself more RAM for my Threadripper because that's what it uses. And I needed more RAM anyways. So, but it's probably not as critical for third gen, although it probably could be a benefit if you do decide to go that route. Now, B die is still available. You can still buy it, but it can be a little bit more difficult to acquire. Another thing, let me pull up. Okay, here's the article. This isn't what I wanted to pull up, but anyways, so this was May 6th. When it was announced, and again, you can go and read all about this if you're that interested. This starts getting more into like higher end, like you're really trying to push the performance of your Ryzen system, and there's no reason you shouldn't. I like doing this kind of stuff. I like to try to milk it for what I can. So if you're interested, the information is there. Okay, give me 1 second. My link to my B die finder is gone. Give me 1 second. I have no idea how it just disappeared. There it is. I use this program or this online program called Evernote, but it's not really good for presentations and Google Docs. I don't know. I need to find a new one. But anyways, here's what I was talking about. So this is B die finder. You remember earlier I showed you guys the charts of the motherboards, so you can kind of comb through it, try to find the motherboard for you. This is a little similar. But if you really want the best memory, Samsung B die, especially for AMD, is still the best memory. Again, I don't know how much better performance it's going to benefit Ryzen 3rd gen, but it's awesome for Ryzen 1st and 2nd gen. So I'm making a little bit of an assumption that it's still going to kind of translate over to Ryzen 3rd gen. And it wasn't discontinued because of that it's not good or anything like that. We don't know. Like that was one of the things I was trying to find out. I was like, why would they discontinue this awesome RAM? But anyways, if you notice here, you got all the different brands and you got the different speeds. Hardware Unboxed did a test of RAM, and I don't know. Let's see if it's over here. Actually, I don't have it. I don't have that slide. I didn't have time to grab it. But he basically compared the differences in performance between 3200 speed and 3600 speed. As you just heard Robert say that the best, price to performance sweet spot is 3600. He didn't mention BDI or anything at CAS latency 15 or 16. So what you can do, you can go to this website. You can select 3200. You might be able to go 14. Yeah, you can go 14. That's what I ended up going with. That would be really good. Actually, let's choose the 36. So let's say you want to go 3600. Okay, the lowest you're going to find for BDI is going to be 15 or 16. You want to kind of stay in that parameter. Now, I'm not a RAM expert. I'm not good with tinkering with timings. I'm not going to pretend that I have like this vast knowledge of how to do that. I'm learning it though. But it's not something that I have a lot of experience in because for one reason, I've been using Intel for the past 2 decades. There's been no reason to. You just buy some decent RAM, slap it in there. You don't really have to worry about it. But with AMD, there can be some really good benefits if you know what you're doing, which I'm going to admit I don't. But I'm learning, and I'm going to try to point you guys in the direction of where you can go if you want to learn too. So the CAS latency is the latency that is basically used to communicate, transmit the information from the memory DIMMs to the CPU memory controller, from my understanding. And obviously you got your timings and whatnot, and you can go in and adjust these things. I won't get into all the overclocking business now, but the lower the number on the CAS, the faster that you want a lower number. So for example, like let's say if you go with like a 3600 and you go with an 18 CAS, you may actually get better performance by going with a 3200 at 14 CAS. Even though the speed of the memory is 400 megahertz slower, because that CAS latency is lower, it potentially is going to be either right on par or maybe even faster. But a lot of that gets into testing, and there's some testers out there that are kind of obviously working at it. But I went ahead and went with 32 at 14 CAS latency, and I went with the BDI. But one of the reasons I also went with that is when Steve at Hardware Unboxed did his testing for RAM, he saw no performance difference between 3600 and 32. But that could change with newer BIOS updates and updates to the Ryzen Master. And also, as I mentioned earlier about the dynamic, let's see, where is it? The dynamic local mode. So with dynamic local mode, there's a scheduling that goes on within Windows, and apparently I know my Threadripper has it. It has, you can either turn it on or off. And generally, if you're playing games, you want to turn it off. But when it's on, it's supposed to help. And I'm not going to say I'm going to explain this the best, but I'm going to try. It's supposed to, actually, I might have a video on that. I think I do. Let me look in my notes here. Because Robert, yep, I do have it. Let's see if we can check it out here.
Straight from the source.
Okay, so yep, we'll just let Robert explain it. Straight from the horse's mouth. My notes are paying off. Excuse me, guys. Sorry about that. So I'm going to let him talk, and he'll explain the advantages of dynamic local mode.
You can share with us.
The worst. Okay, yes, I have hot goss. Okay.
Oh, he did.
Hot goss alert.
Yeah, terrible. Okay, so thinking back to first gen Threadripper, we released a version of Ryzen Master that allowed people to switch between local mode and distributed mode. And behind the scenes, what that would do is tweak the behavior of the system to prefer like the lowest possible memory latency, that's local mode, or the highest possible memory bandwidth, and that's distributed mode. And there was a clear benefit when you paired a certain application with the right mode. There was, sometimes 10 or even 20% uplift, especially games. Games loved local mode for the memory latency reasons. So one of the things that was somewhat contentious, though, is that toggling between the two requires a system reboot. So the benefits are great, but it's kind of awkward to reboot your computer. So we've been thinking about how to make that a little better, especially when you get to a product like the Threadripper 2990WX, which now has 4 CPU dies, right? 2 have memory and 2 don't. Mm-hmm. So that possibility that an application could want direct memory access, benefit from it, and not get it because it's on another die, that possibility increases. So the question becomes, what if you could give that local memory access benefit without impacting the apps that just love to spread across as many cores as possible with high memory bandwidth? That is possible. We built a tool called Dynamic Local Mode, which it works something like this. When a process runs, say you start Notepad. Notoriously demanding Notepad. You see, Notepad.exe in the task manager, but behind the scenes it spawns one or more threads of work, and those threads get assigned to CPU cores. And so what we do is we look at all the threads in flight on the system, not the processes, but the threads themselves, and count how many CPU cycles those threads have consumed. In other words, asking how important or how demanding is this thread? And then we rank them from highest to lowest demand. And then we say, okay, the top 16 threads, or the most demanding threads, we're going to schedule those. We're going to restrict them to running on the dies with local memory access first. So it's possible to look at Task Manager and spawn a really highly threaded app, and you'll see tasks get bounced to other cores as our utility kicks in and manages the apps to these specific dies with direct memory access. And any thread that doesn't fit inside those CPU dies with direct memory access, maybe they're full, maybe those dies are full, our tool has consumed all of those resources, the other threads will just go by the default Windows scheduler behavior to use the remaining CPU dies and cores. So the end result is that those lightly threaded applications that would prefer direct memory access or local memory access, guaranteed to get that when our tool kicks in and pushes them there. And any of the threads or any of the processes that just go wide and use every core and thread available, no impact, right? The tool is going to direct the first 16 or 32 threads to those initial dies, and then the other ones will just go to the non-RAM dies, and nothing changes. It's business as usual. So we're still working through the performance benefits, but they can be substantial when you get those apps always running in their correct mode. So this is a tool we're developing for Windows. It will run in the background as a system service. It will be an optional package in our chipset driver. So one day you'll go download the newest version of the AMD chipset driver, and if you want, it will install this service in the background and just constantly poke processes onto the fastest die available for that workload. And so that's pretty cool. We get benefits of local mode and distributed mode on these 4 die chips, and get a performance benefit out of it, and the user doesn't have to do anything but install our chipset driver, which they're going to do anyway.
Easy enough.
So there is the hot goss.
You heard it here.
And there it is, guys. That's straight from the horse's mouth. So this I believe should also be implemented with the new Ryzen Master for Ryzen 3rd Gen. I haven't seen it. I haven't got to mess with it yet, but I don't know if this is going to be much of a benefit to gaming. It could. I think it really depends on your setup and what you're doing. But that's just important to know, because I know I had to use it on my Threadripper, because I definitely noticed a difference. But anyways, getting back to the actual memory, as I mentioned before, Steve did some tests where he compared 3600 speed to 3200. I don't know really how much knowledge Steve has in regards to like the timings and things like that, because he doesn't seem to talk about that very much in his channel. He probably knows it, but he probably tries to he tries to talk in a way that he's educational to his viewers, but not like Gamers Nexus. Like Gamers Nexus, and I love Steve. Steve's awesome. I hope he never goes away because he's awesome. But he talks so technical sometimes, not always, but it starts to get out there for the average consumer. And even for me, like there are things I'm pretty knowledgeable about and I can follow him, but then sometimes I'm listening to him and I'm like, I am so lost. I have no idea what the fuck you're talking about. So Steve tries to take, I noticed the difference in his approach and his presentations when he's doing reviews and whatnot. He does it in a way where he's not going to spoon feed you, but he's not also going to overload you with a retarded amount of technical information. Exactly. Gamers Nexus, you're getting everything. But again, I love Steve. I watch it as much as I can. It's invaluable information. But probably not recommended for just the average consumer. I definitely wouldn't turn them away though. So anyways, since there wasn't much of a difference in benefits from 3200 to 3600 at this time, doesn't mean it won't be later. I went ahead and went with 3200 because of cost and because of the fact that well, when you see the prices, you'll see why as well, because it's not the system I'm building. I mean, I want it to be good, but I didn't need to spend an extra, it's like an extra $100 to get the 3616 and considering that there's no performance showing now, and even if it shows later, I don't think it's going to be that much. And if there is, then maybe I'll sell my kit and get one. But I just went with, what I could, and I'll show you guys in a minute. The next thing I want to talk about, so the link for this will be in the description. If you want Samsung B-Die, if you think it's something that you want to add to it, and you can research it yourself as well. I encourage you to. I encourage all of you to do more research outside of what I'm bringing you, because things change. So there might be something else that changes that, completely nullifies what I'm saying here. Hopefully not too much. But yeah, just go through and just, search the vendor you want. I can say I've had the best luck with G-Skill in regards to that. So, good luck with that. Let's see. Let's talk about real quickly, how much RAM do you guys need? I don't think that's really too much we need to discuss, but let's put it out there so we don't assume. So as a gamer, the minimum you really should be using, even if you're doing 1080p, if you are just scraping by, I mean, you're really scraping by and you have to go with 8 gigs, fine. But prepare, you're going to need 16. 16 is kind of the sweet spot for 1080p, 1440p, and 4K will do fine. It wouldn't hurt to go 32 at 4K because Steve actually found that if you have 32 gigs of RAM and you're running 4K, you can see as much as a 7% increase in performance in your games. So I went ahead and went 32 on both my systems just because not just for the gaming, but one for the gaming, but one because I'm also going to do some production. So I wanted to have that extra for Premiere Timeline and shit like that. But just 16 should be the sweet spot for you guys. And like I said, if you're on a budget and you can't afford 16, I don't see why you wouldn't. There's some good budget RAM kits out there, and I've got the listings. And let me see if I can go ahead and bring those up. And again, this will be in the description. So actually, I think I already had that. So here are some budget memory kits that should work on your Ryzen system, even if you're doing mid-range and you just want to get a budget for now. And I mean, here's a kit, $70 for 16 gigs. There's so many here that you can go through, and obviously, the more you scroll down, the higher the price. If you want to get RGB and all that, you can. I love RGB, but I don't build for it. I build for function and performance, not for bling bling. My computer is another room. I don't see it except for when I go to turn it on and clean it. I'm looking at my monitor or my TV. So, but to each his own, But yeah, so these are like the budget kits. Now, if you guys want the B-Die memory, like the good shit, I believe Let's see. I thought I had set up a link for that. Okay, here we go. Now, these are going to be difficult to get because all the enthusiasts are after them. So, okay, so this kit here, this is a 16 gig 3600, and this is a 16 CAS latency, which would be okay, but 15 would be better, but it's out of stock. This one here is 3615. Is this in stock? Okay, yeah, I was like, there's no way it's $164. Okay, because I was like, damn, I could get that. So yeah, we're looking at 240 there. So this is more high-end memory, but again, I don't really think I didn't get the high-end memory. I got, like I said, I got the 30, it is BDI, but I went with 3214. It's much cheaper. So, but if you want to go this route, or later on they tweak it more and memory's starting to perform better, then by all means, yeah, go for it. There's another kit here. This one is 32, and what the CAS latency is on it, 14. So yeah, this is actually, this is the kit I got, but I didn't pay this much for it. I got mine for 150. And here's another one here that's also BDI. This one's 32. Now that leads me into the next discussion about memory. Single and dual rank memory. Now, I don't have confirmation on this yet, but for those of you who aren't aware, you have what is known as single rank and dual rank memory. That is not to be confused with single channel and dual channel. Okay, they're two different things. Now, single rank is, it basically determines how many chiplets are on your PCB for your memory DIMM. Now, generally speaking, and based on the research that I've done, you're only going to find dual rank memory on 16 gigabyte DIMMs. So like 32 gig kits. If you're buying a 16 gig kit where you've got an 8 DIMM, 2 8 DIMMs, it's going to be single rank. Now you're probably wondering, why am I talking about single and dual rank? I don't know what the hell you're talking about. Well, I'm trying to explain. Not doing the best at it. So I don't have full confirmation on this, but I went and did some research on the differences in performance between single rank and dual rank. I found several, and again, these links will be in the description. I found several resources that showed, and benchmarks, that using dual rank RAM yielded better performance. Not a lot. We're talking like a minimal performance gain, probably anywhere from 1 to 3%. But again, that extra little bit, it adds up. A little bit here, a little bit there. That's just a little bit more. But unfortunately, those are only going to be on the 32 gig kits, and those kits are pretty expensive. As you saw, they're like close to $250. So actually, I think that was what it was. Yeah, so this one's 240. This one, whoa, this one went up. So this one is like almost $300. So is it worth that extra little bit of performance? For me, no. And probably not for you guys. But I'm just throwing it out here in case some of you are interested. I don't know what you want. It's your money. Maybe you do want it. If I had the money, would I do it? Probably not. I'd probably spend my money elsewhere, even if I had the money. I mean, obviously I do. I bought a 9700K. I'm building that, but I'd probably, probably spend it in Vegas or something. Just kidding. But yeah, but I'm just throwing it out there as an option if you want to go that route. I also have links in the description that explain a little bit more about how single and dual rank works. And since I'm short on time, because I've already gone over 2 hours and I was trying to get all this done in 2 hours and we haven't discussed GPUs yet, I'll let you guys investigate that on your own. There's also a link down there to discuss memory layouts, as there's 3 of them. And yeah, I think we pretty much hit all the topics. So 16 gigs is pretty much what you want to be aiming for. You could probably go with budget RAM. Probably don't need to go with the 3600. If if you want to, go for it. If you really want to go extreme, get the B die, and if you want to go more extreme, investigate the dual rank. I do have a dual rank kit, but it is a B die, but I didn't have to pay this much. I had it from before the prices went up, so I'm gonna be testing that out to see how well it works, if there's any additional performance, but I'm not holding my breath, and I'm not that concerned. So do you guys have any questions about memory that I maybe didn't answer or whatever? And like I said, all the links, like the links to the budget RAM and the B-die RAM, will be in the description, everything. And of course the B-die finder, if you want to go with that.
Boy.
As far as memory goes, I got a 16 to 3200 Corsair Vengeance set on sale with a full return until at least August 16th. Okay, it should work from whatever. Yeah, you should be fine. I really don't think getting any kind of high-end memory for this generation, at this time, it doesn't seem to be benefiting. Now, Ryzen 2nd, it was a big benefit. Like there was a pretty big benefit. It's mainly for gaming. In fact, only for gaming. There wasn't anything for production. That's why I went with 3000 for my Threadripper. I could have gone 3200, but it was ridiculously expensive. And since I'm not gaming on it, it's like, what's the point? Buy for your use case, I guess. So yeah, you should be fine. Let me go ahead and start setting up. You guys can go ahead and ask questions if you need, but let me start setting up for GPU. Now, this is going to be real interesting, guys. The GPU, and then I'm going to also point out some serious things that these reviewers are neglecting, because it's very important. So I guess we'll go ahead and jump into the GPU benchmarks. So as you guys know, before we do that, let me do this. Close that out. So as you guys are aware, I want to make you aware of both Team Green and Team Red here. So as you guys know, there were new GPUs released on both sides, and we're now getting a new. We'll talk about NVIDIA first. This is the NVIDIA chart, and we've got the new super cards. And as we go through the benchmarks, I'm going to be explaining why you would maybe go with one card or the other, and why you don't even want to bother with certain cards like at all, unless you get like some kind of crazy sale deal, and even then that might be argued. So the 2070 cards are being phased out. They're eventually they're not going to be available, and right now, if I were you, based on budget, and we'll get into we'll get into the benchmarks. If you were targeting to getting a 2070 card, your new target should now be the 2060 Super. It performs right on par with the 2070, and it's cheaper. So, but we haven't gotten into Navi, that is a consideration, because I'm not playing favors here. I'm just trying to put all the cards out, as I mentioned. So the 2070 is going to go away. The 2080 is also going to go away, being replaced by the 2080 Super. But before we get to there, the 2070 Super is, for the most part, equivalent to the current 2080 as far as performance. It's a little bit less, kind of like the 2060 Super, but it's, for the most part, within a margin of error. So if you were planning on getting a 2080 for $700, you can now buy a 2070 Super for $500 and go that route.
Boy.
If you were looking to getting a 2080 Ti, first off, I would not recommend that card, even though I own one and I am very happy with mine. But I would only recommend it if you've just got fuck you money and you don't care. But if you want, and you want to play 4K, true 4K. But with the 2080 Super coming out now, we haven't seen benchmarks yet, but I suspect that this card it's going to, if it performs like what we're seeing from the 2070 and 2060 as far as the jump in performance, we should start seeing that being able to do 4K. It probably won't be able to do 4K like I'm fortunately able to do, where I'm able to max out all settings at no compromise. We'll just call it no compromise 4K. It probably won't be able to do that. On some titles, it probably will, but you're going to probably have a little compromise, but you'll have a lot less because it's going to perform a lot better than the 1080 Ti, because the reality is the 2080, the current 2080 performs on par with the 1080 Ti. There's a little give or take depending on the title, but there really was no upgrade on the game side. Now, on the stream side, there was an upgrade. We're going to talk about that later because that's very important. So if you're looking to do 4K gaming and you want to save some money, and we haven't gotten into Navi yet because that is a contender, the 2080 Super is probably going to be the recommended if you're on a budget, but you want to try to get that 4K experience, like, pretty good. Again, if you not worried about money, no compromise, then go with the 2080 Ti and you will be good for several years. But the 2060 Super is legit. It's a good card, and so is the 2070. For my HTPC, I haven't decided what I'm going to do yet. It is going to be an NVIDIA card, but not because I don't like what AMD has, because I do. But there's one problem with AMD, and if they fix it, then I might go with an AMD card. In fact, I will if they fix it, but I don't think that's going to happen. So anyways, the prices are down below. I'm sure you guys have researched this, all the CUDA cores. We don't really need to spend a lot of time on that. Let me go ahead and show you. I don't have the specs, it looks like, but I do have the new Navi card. So I apologize. I guess I should have gotten that. I was kind of running out on time, like pretty badly, and I had a really zippity-doo-dah day today. I'll talk about that later. So we have the RX 5700 XT 50th edition. There is a slight difference in the regular, but probably, unless you're a collector, probably not worth buying. And these are the prices have been updated because the super cards came out. So the prices have dropped, and the performance for the prices on for the new card for these cards is good. Like, these cards are legit. But I have one problem with them, and again, this may or may not affect you. The stream side. If you want to stream to Twitch or any other platform, this is not the card to do it with. That is one place where it lacks. And if you don't care about that, this might be the card for you, one of these cards. Because on the production side, these things are amazing. But before we get into that, let's talk about the game benchmarks. So here are the gaming benchmarks. All the contenders are pretty much on the table except for the 2080 Super, because it hasn't been launched yet. But based on what I know and what we're seeing here, it's pretty safe to say that it is gonna be a pretty good contender for 4K gaming. But there'll probably be a little compromising involved. But this is Battlefield 5. Sorry, the screenshot didn't turn out so well. Let me see if the next one's better. Okay, there we go. That's much better. So we can go full screen on this. Okay, so we got Battlefield 5 here. And this was done, there's no 1080p because this is graphics. We're not focused on CPU anymore. 1080 Ti is pretty much all secondhand right now. Yeah. If there are any new ones, they're like almost $2,000. Yeah, not worth it. It's an amazing card, best of its time, but not worth $2,000. So here's the 1440p results. I mean, you can obviously see the 5700 XT. And when you compare that with because these cards, the 5700 XT and 5700, they're in the price bracket and competing with the 2060 and 2070 Super. So, I mean, obviously you got to go and check the prices, but this gives you an idea of the performance and what you're getting for the price. And the AMD cards are they're kicking ass for the most part, like really, really well. I mean, like on this title, obviously they win out. And there's a few other things, comparisons besides just FPS that we're going to need to talk about, specifically DLSS, ray tracing, and AMD's Radeon image sharpener. Yeah, Radeon image sharpener. And then, of course, the production side. So here's Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six. Again, I mean, when you consider the price compared to the competition and where the performance is at, these cards are legit. I mean, these are really good cards. The problem with these cards, another problem with these cards, is they went with the blower fans. I'm going to strongly encourage you, do not, if you're going to buy one of these cards, do not buy the blower fan. Don't do it. Don't do it. I'll say that again. Don't do it. Wait for the third-party aftermarket cooler cards. Exactly. That's exactly what I'm getting to. Yeah, because they're just too goddamn hot. You know, you want to run it cool. And in fact, Steve, and I'll show this later, he actually modded his, and he got really good results. So here's Metro Exodus. This is another title this title is a monster of a graphic hog, and it did pretty well. I mean, you got the 2070 to the 5700 XT. I mean, yeah, it may not be performing as well, but when you consider the price, it's hanging in there really well. And this is 1440p, you know, which I think the target audience here is probably going to be generally 1080p to 1440p. I don't imagine too many of you are like diehard 4K. You know, that's more extremist retards like me or the ones doing that kind of stuff, and it's not the most advisable thing. Resident Evil, again, I mean, this is probably not the best title to choose, because the game engine for Resident Evil is so good, and I mean, it's nice to see that it does well on AMD as well, but I mean, they really know how to optimize their games. The only complaint about the Resident Evil engine is the colors are washed out. It just doesn't look very good. So here's Shadow of the Tomb Raider. This, oh my God, this game is a graphic hog. I remember when I was trying to play this with my 1080 Ti, it struggled. I had to do it in 1440p because it couldn't do 4K. It just couldn't do it. But I mean, it's doing like my 1080 Ti. Well, shit. I mean, look at the chart here. You can tell the 1080 Ti is getting that. Yeah, that's why I went to 1440p, so I could maintain that 60 FPS or higher. But this thing is hanging in with it. And this card is what, 450? I think. Yeah, 450. That is crazy. Now, the really cool thing about AMD coming out with these cards is we got a GPU war going on now, aside from the CPU war. And that's good for us because that means the price hacks are going to be, you know, coming down. I mean, we've already seen two. You know, we're seeing one from NVIDIA, and then we saw one from, you know, AMD's response was another price cut. So I won't be surprised if we see another one. You know, I don't think it's going to be too much more, but, you know, we might see some deals and things like that. So it looks like the super cards clearly seem to favor the Fortnite. And again, you know, you need to, I mentioned this earlier, you need to try to target for the games that you go for and, you know, the engines and whatnot. So they don't do that great. If you're doing Fortnite, I wouldn't buy this card. If you're doing, even if you're just doing it casually, well, maybe not casually, but how should I say, I mean, even if you're not an esports gamer, I still wouldn't buy this card if you're doing Fortnite, because Fortnite is, you want that FPS, and being that it's, you know, a multiplayer competitive gamer, you know, and in fact, I would, if it were me, if I was doing it fairly regularly, the minimum would be the 2070 Super. I'd be probably waiting for 2080 Super for that. The Division. This is a game I don't have any experience with. It's actually the second one. And a lot of these I haven't really had time to really digest. I've kind of had I can't tell you how many reviews I've watched over the last few days. It's been ridiculous. Like, I'm so behind on work. And I didn't even have the stream ready as much as I wanted to. That's why I'm over my time. But yeah, it actually does pretty well here in the Division 2. It beats it out in Dirt Rally 2. There's a game called Forenza, I think. Yeah, this one. Just speaking of this game, I don't play games like this, but if you're into these type of Sims games, the Forza Horizon 4, this thing competes with a 2080 Ti on that game. So if this is a game that you play like a lot, or maybe you just want to build you a 3600, Ryzen system and slap one of these in there just for a sim gaming system, that's the way to go. There you go. I mean, the supercards, they don't do very well at all with those for some reason. I mean, obviously the 2080 Ti does, but that's one of the reasons why I did the 2080 Ti and the 9700K, because I don't want to, come down a road where a year or 2 years from now, I'm screwed because, a certain title isn't going to play. Now, obviously it's going to depend on the developer, and obviously more games are coming out, but I would say for the next 2 years, whatever games are being developed now that get released in the next 2 years are still focusing probably more on Intel and NVIDIA cards. So it should be okay. I don't think we're going to start seeing a big change on the PC side till maybe at the earliest 3-4 years. But we will start to see it. And that's good for us gamers, because that means that we're going to start seeing more games taking advantage of more cores and more threads and utilizing them better. And not only that, even on the graphics side too, but on even both on the GPU and CPU, but we might even get better AI, because the AI, if we've got the high, compute cycles from either the CPU or the GPU, then that allows the programmers to develop better AI. So, which means single player games will get better, and on console too, not just on PC. So, and I'm not an engineer, I'm not a programmer, but that I am aware of because I've been following some guys that are talking about it, and just listening to them is fascinating. So it's exciting too. So now that the monopoly is kind of broken, second gen was a good chip at it. First gen was kind of okay, there's a whisper there of, there's problems coming for Intel. But second gen was really we're okay, Intel is in trouble. Third gen, Intel is now fucked. They're fucked if they keep going this way. So now that developers know this, both on hardware side and production and gaming, this is going to change things in a way that is so good. So, I mean, if you look back at, why we've been stuck on dual core and quad core processors, a lot of it has been the cost too. And developers know that, specifically in games, that a lot of us we're not able to afford these high-end workstations that had, 8 core, 10 cores or whatever. And those were even at lower clock speeds too, to be able to do games that we're going to be able to perform. And it wasn't until 9th gen, maybe I guess I should say 8th gen, where we started to get the 6 core, and then we got the 9th gen where we started to kind of see that. But that was only because of AMD, because AMD started to push that front with more cores. And even though Intel was still leading, because, of the higher clocks, the core count matters. So now AMD is closing the gap on not just the clock speed, but also, the technology of the IPC and the memory controller. All that stuff it's going to come to fold. I think 4th gen will probably be the generation, unless Intel pulls something out, which we haven't heard anything. I think 4th gen will probably be the generation where AMD completely drowns out Intel. I'm just guessing. So anyways, here's World War Z. And it looks like the Radeon 5700 XT does really well in this title. What was a Far Cry? Okay, I kind of glazed over Far Cry. Does in Far Cry, yeah, Far Cry is a pretty neck and neck. So that's actually kind of good because the Far Cry series is pretty popular. And I don't know if we did Assassin's Creed. So we did the World War Z. Okay, great. Assassin's Creed. Not as good as Far Cry. The 1% lows are not the greatest either, but I don't know. That'd be a little iffy. But of course, maybe with more updated drivers, I can say this. Part of the reason is Assassin's Creed is a hog, both CPU and GPU, and it also is multi-threaded. So that's one of the reasons. Like this is one of the games that the 9700K, it does good, but the 9900K does beat it because it has the hyper-threading as well, but not by much. It's like marginal. So okay, so we've gone through those. Let's look at the production side. There's not a lot here that we need to really cover. Actually, let's look at the power. So here's the power as far as what's used. I honestly didn't get a chance to really listen to Steve to break this down accordingly. But like I said, you can go watch the video. He's going to break it down far better than I am. But you can see the power draw differences. If you look at the 5700 versus the 2060 Super, I mean, it's a lot less power. And of course there's some games where it's performing on par and some where it's not performing as well. And the same thing with the 5700 XT versus the 2070 Super. So that's kind of cool. Less power, is good. And then here's the overall total system power. And again, the Radeon is beating out, well, not on the 5700 XT. Looks like that lost a little bit, but not by a whole lot. That's a little interesting. Let's go back. Interesting. Okay, and let me show you guys. So here is the slide. This is pictures from Steve's modded. I don't remember if this is the 57 XT or no, this is the 5700. So basically he took his own, cooler and slapped it on there, and he was able to get a little bit more, FPS and obviously better cooling. So that just shows that it's advisable, wait for those aftermarket coolers and go that route. Let's talk about production some more. Okay, so I'm going to direct you guys to a YouTuber by the name of Epos Vox on this because I don't have the experience that he clearly does. He's very knowledgeable about this stuff, and I'm learning as I go too. But he did some tests comparing the Ryzen 7 3700 paired with a B450 and a 5700 graphics card. And he was doing some DaVinci Resolve rendering. It was a 4K 60 FPS project, and he was able to get that done at 6 minutes and 5 seconds. And when you compare that to a 3700 X to a 2080 Ti, which is the flagship from NVIDIA, it beats it out. Now, it's not like by a lot, it's 30 seconds, but when you're working production, all those seconds as you're doing renderings and you're doing a lot of them, it starts to add up. So now, one thing that I mentioned earlier when I was kind of swaying you guys away from the X570 boards, he did say this is a B450 board. So this still gives really good production value. But there is the potentiality of getting even better with an X570 board because of the PCIe 4th gen when using those the new NVIMe drives, those SSDs. So, I mean, this is beating out. I think it even beats out my Threadripper. Of course, my Threadripper, I'm not actually. I actually have to go back and talk to him about this particular bench because this is really interesting. That a 2950X with a 2080 Ti, which I don't have my 2080 Ti on my Threadripper. I mean, that's almost half the time. That's crazy. It's so crazy. So anyways, that's one. And then here's another one he did. This is another DaVinci Resolve. Okay, so this is Cineform. I'm not really familiar with these. So like I said, the link will be in the description, but his name is Epos Fox. Oh, just real quick. Don't ever mention anything about widescreen or any kind of black bars because he has some kind of PTSD about it. I don't know what scarred him from it, but don't mention it because he's very sensitive to that. Other than that, yeah, you're good. But he's definitely a go-to guy. He's very knowledgeable. I definitely recommend it. Oh, actually, there's some more slides here. So here's another one that he did. Trying to see. Oh, this is H.264. So if you're still, this is what I render in. Okay. So this would actually be for me. I don't render in the other ones. I generally do H.264. So even with the 3700X and the 5700 beats out. Oh yeah, it beats out my Threadripper by a little over 3 minutes. That is crazy. So what I'm thinking I may do is do all my editing on my Threadripper and render on my HTPC. That way I can kind of like, do because I usually run my HTPC when I'm working anyways. So that may be a way I go. And if they can fix the encoding for streaming on their GPUs, maybe I'll go with an AMD card. I don't know. Here's some more DaVinci Resolve times. So I don't really spend a lot of time on these, but I definitely don't want to ignore it because production side is relevant, and even if you're not doing it now, it might be something you decide to do in the future. Okay, Drago, no problem. I'm about finished here too. And if there's anything left, you can always watch this on YouTube, catch up the last bit. You have a good night. And I think that's the end for that. So now we need to discuss one of the biggest problems with the new AMD cards and why you may or may not want to go with an AMD card versus an NVIDIA card. And that is streaming. So Epos Fox has done some testing, and the AMD the encoding that is done on AMD when trying to stream to like Twitch or YouTube or whatever is unusable. It's just awful. And there is no word yet if it's something that can be fixed with a driver or if it's something with the encoder or the plugin with OBS. I can say that I have a slide here of the H.264 encoder from AMD, and it's also not very user friendly because there's all these different settings in here that are just ridiculous. And NVIDIA, there's hardly any settings. I mean, it's very easy to set up, and not only does it work and work well, in some cases it performs better than CPU encoding. But one of the things that I want to push more so about the RTX cards over the AMD cards in regards to streaming. So if you're going to be streaming, or maybe you're not going to do it now, but you think you might in the future, the RTX cards are the way to go. And part of the reason why is the RTX cards have their own cores called tensor cores. And these are separate from the CUDA cores. The CUDA cores are mainly going to be the driving horsepower for your games. So if you're gaming, you've got your CPU and your GPU pushing your game. And if you're streaming and you're using an NVIC encoder with an RTX card, you set it to that, it's going to use the tensor cores, which offloads it's almost like having another, like die, which it basically is, to do the work. So your game doesn't have to suffer at all, and your stream shouldn't suffer at all either. I will say though, that depending on what processor you go with and how you do your settings, you could potentially run into problems if you're trying to stream and record at the same time, because I had that problem when I was researching my setup. And part of the reason why I went with a Threadripper. Now my Threadripper does it, and it does it without breaking a sweat, but you don't need to go that route. And I suspect that you could probably go with a 3700X paired with an NVIDIA card, an RTX card, and I would recommend going with an 8 gig. Do not go with a 6 gig card, especially for streaming, minimum, like a super or one of the super cards, and stream with the NVIC encoder and let the CPU push all your background apps like your OBS and anything else, and your game, and let the main CUDA cores push the graphics for your game. And you should be able to stream and game with no issues, unless you decide you want to record. You might run into issues there. That's something I am going to be testing when I get my 3700X up and running, but it probably won't be till next month, because I have to wait till next month to buy the graphics card because of budget. So with that being said, that is one of the main key points I wanted to point out, that a lot of these reviewers are just ignoring. Nobody is talking about that. And it is very important, because if you go and buy one of these new AMD cards and you want to stream, even if you're going to be buying a 3900X, let's say you buy a 3900X. I saw a guy the other day, the day launch day. I went on Reddit. He said he was testing out his 3900X for streaming, and he was trying to stream using his CPU and let his GPU, run the game. I don't think he had an RTX card, and he had a lot of performance issues. It could do it, but not really. There was a lot of frame dropping and buffering and things like that. The buffering is generally his connection, but it wasn't able to do it because it was trying to run the game. It was trying to run OBS and encode, and nothing was really being offset to the graphics card. So it was having some issues. Now, could it be used if you're okay with dropping frames every now and again? I will say that based on the performance tests that were done, it did seem to perform better than the 9900K. So this is what I suggest. Not that I want to harp on this too much, but if you're going to game, which I kind of already said, and you're going to stream on a single machine, I recommend, getting yourself an 8-core, a 3700X on up to a 3900X, and get yourself an NVIDIA supercard. You could go with one of the older cards too. Not older cards, like the 1660 Ti. You could get one of those because those support RTX as well. But I mean, I imagine if you're streaming, you're probably not playing at that low of a res. But I mean, if you're on a budget, you could do it with that as well. But I would probably recommend a minimum like a 2060 Super, for streaming, if you want a good quality, because you don't want to paint yourself into a corner where you buy it and it's just not enough and you're still getting like frame drops. You want it to work. And trust me, this is something I have spent countless hours on and trying to figure out. And yes, you don't need a Threadripper, even though that's what I got. Yeah. Well, that's another thing too. And let me pull that up real quick, because that was, there are some other options, in regards to streaming too, as far as like, obviously you can go with the dual system setup. But let me just finish this out. So I recommend getting an 8-core, anything from a 3700X on up to a 3900X, get you a super card and use the NVIC encoder for the streaming, and let your CPU push the game and the CUDA cores from the GPU push the game, and try not to run too many background applications. Try to keep it now. If you're running a 3900X, then obviously you'll be able to run more applications. But I mean, again, a lot of this still needs to be tested. But based on what I've tested, what I've seen from other reviewers, that's what I would definitely recommend. But you're not going to be able to do this currently if you go with an AMD card. And but if you don't plan to stream, the AMD card is a contender. And for the price, I'd consider it. But also consider too that the AMD cards have really good production value as well. In fact, almost better production value than game value. There's a guy, Level 1 Tex, who's also affiliated with Epoch Vox, who he's doing all this testing on the more production side, and they're getting some amazing production out of it, like really phenomenal. So if that's something that interests you, but let me show you these slides real quick. I pulled it up, but I didn't really explain it. So one of the reasons, another thing too, you also want to be using the new NVIC encoder if you get an RTX card. Doesn't matter if it's super or not. I'm just recommending the super because of the price and because of the 8 gigs. But so a while back, let's see. So a long time ago, before the RTX cards, when you were streaming on with OBS, the graphics card had to send information to the memory, and then it had to go back to the graphics card in order for the encoding and for all the encoding and everything. And that was a lot more system load for your system. It also, the NVIC encoder that was on like the 10 series cards and before, not that it wasn't good, because it actually is good, wasn't as good. So now, instead of going to the memory, everything is done on the GPU. So that also takes off a big load from the CPU and memory, and everything is also done on the tensor cores, not on your CUDA cores, which would be taken away from your game. So that's another reason. I really like to push this a little bit, probably more than I should, because I've found, I've gotten people that have come to my stream and they don't stream, but they're interested in doing it, or they're thinking about doing it. And if you do end up getting, if you do go with an AMD card and you decide later you want to do it, you're kind of painted into a corner. You're going to have to either go buy a new card or try to sell the one you have. And we want to try to avoid that if we can. But I don't want to come off like I'm an NVIDIA fanboy. Like it's like, oh, it's all about Team Green. Because if you're not, go buy an AMD card. That's what I would do. If I had no intentions of streaming or using the certain encoding features, or things like that. And Photoshop, that's still argued whether or not it's going to work better with NVIDIA or not. I still have to wait for that. AMD seems to be the way to go. But again, you have to also consider, is it worth that $50 too? Because it's not a big savings. It is $50. To me, $50 when buying hardware like that isn't that big. It isn't start to get big for me. And of course, everybody's expectations are different until you get to the $100 mark. That's where I'm like, okay, now if there was $100 difference, then yeah, it'd be a no-brainer. $50, it's kind of like, is it worth it to spend that extra $50 to at least know that you have that option should you want to? I mean, that's for you guys to answer. I know what my answer is though. Okay, so I think, I don't know if there's anything else. Oh, yes, there is one more important thing. A plus for AMD on the on their new cards. So this slide isn't really going to be the best demonstration. Again, go check out Epos Fox because he's going to be testing all this stuff. But so the AMD, on the AMD side, they've got this new thing called Radeon Image Sharpening. And this is legit technology. So what it does is it is doing what DLSS is supposed to do on the new RTX cards from NVIDIA. It's supposed to provide upscaling. So you're going from like 1440p to kind of like a 4K resolution. It's not 4K, okay, but it upscales it to trick you into, like, it looks very close. And I've seen images on it, and I've seen like on monitor, not the AMD version, but I've seen it on the NVIDIA side. NVIDIA's is terrible. Like, their DLSS is garbage. I don't really need to use it though, because I have a 2080 Ti, but I did test it out just to see. It's pretty garbage. But the ray tracing, when it works and when they implement it into a game, it's like going from standard RGB to HDR. If any of you have ever seen the difference in the visual fidelity and quality, I'm comparing apples and oranges here. I'm using it more of as an analogy, not actually saying that's what you're going to see, but it is an enhancement that is pretty breathtaking. I saw a really nice global illumination in Metro Exodus that I really enjoyed. So if we can get NVIDIA and developers to utilize it more, that is really cool. But don't buy an NVIDIA card for RTX. There's still not enough for it, and it's still not stable enough to warrant it. But I look forward to Cyberpunk 2077. I'm hoping they do it right for that. I'm looking forward to that. But getting back to AMD, their upscaling is working and doing really well. And but it only works on DirectX 9, Vulkan, and DirectX 12. There was some discussion I attended yesterday on Discord between Tim and Epoch Fox, and they were debating whether or not it worked on DirectX 11. Straight from the horse's mouth from AMD, it does not. Tim tested it, and according to him, he says it does not. Epoch Fox was kind of like on the fence about it, on whether it works. So right now, I'm going to bet it doesn't work. But we don't know if that may change in the future or what. Now, depending on your eyes and what you're used to, you may or may not notice the difference between 1440p upscaling with this new RIS technology and true 4K. You may not notice. I will say this. I notice it, but I would be content with this upscaling. If I could get this card and it had good streaming capability, as I harped on enough, beating that dead horse here, and I didn't already have my card now, and I was in the market, I would be totally fine with that. Because this upscalability it works really well, obviously, when it works, and it does work more reliably. But again, it's certain titles depending on whether or not what it's going to be using, either DirectX 9 or 11, because remember, it doesn't work on 11. And I don't know if there's any plans to. So what that means is if you get this, and depending on the games you play, if it works, then you could technically get a $450 card instead of buying a 2080 Super card it'll be able to do 4K, but there'll be some compromises. So you're still saving money, but you're getting close to that performance as well. And again, you'd have to focus a little bit, you'd have to research the games you're playing to know which is going to, probably be the best. For me, like I said, even aside from the streaming, I'd have to wait to see more. I need to see I need to see more updates to the drivers and see what games are coming out. And that's another thing too. And I kind of mentioned this earlier. The games, as we go along, this technology is kind of new, so it's not like games are just magically going to start taking advantage of it. There are a lot of games that are, but there's still a lot of games that aren't going to, because they either were unable to work with AMD or whatever. And hopefully in the future, it's going to get better. I can say this seems to be more promising as far as compatibility with games than actual RTX. And DLSS from NVIDIA is garbage. This actually works. DLSS hasn't really worked too well. I mean, it's arguable on Final Fantasy that it kind of works, but I mean, I didn't play it, but I looked at the reviews on it and it didn't really impress me very much. So I think if you're not interested in streaming and you're looking for a card and you're looking for that kind of budget, I'd still maybe hold off a little bit longer, especially for aftermarket coolers, so you're not getting that blower fan and starting a fire. And let's see some more updates and see where it goes. But it's definitely a contender. I definitely wouldn't count it out. So I know, like, on one hand, I could probably seem like I'm coming off a bit of a fanboy with NVIDIA. I mean, I'm trying to be as objective as I can here, because the only problem I really have with AMD in their card is just the lack of being able to stream. If they fix that, NVIDIA is in trouble. They are in trouble if they fix that. And believe it or not, there are a lot of people out there that do enjoy streaming or encoding as well than you might think. So that's why I made it a big deal, because none of the reviewers are discussing that. They're completely minimizing that and just comparing game performance. And I don't think that's fair to NVIDIA, even though I get pissed at NVIDIA because they're way overpriced. All right. I think that's pretty much it for GPUs, unless you guys have some questions. And then I think we'll wrap up by just kind of throwing out some ideas, just some scenarios on potential builds that you may or may not want to consider. Yeah, so we can do that. So, I mean, I've kind of done this already, but I'll just kind of, I guess, rehash, and then we can open up Q&A. This stream went an hour more than I wanted it to, but oh well. So obviously everybody has a different, budget, different expectations on what you may or may not be using. And I think you guys have enough information here to decide for yourself which direction you want to go and whether you want to wait or just go ahead and jump in. Like I said, I already mentioned, I bought a 3700X for my HTPC. I opted not to go with AMD for my gaming rig, only because it just didn't really quite meet the expectations that I was hoping for on the gaming side. And since I have a dedicated gaming rig, I went ahead and went with the 9700X. Oh, or 9700K. I did want to show the benchmarks of the 9700K and why. I could close that. And why that is somewhat important. If I can find the damn thing. I have way too many tabs open. So yes, here it is. Okay, so these are some benchmarks that I was able to acquire from Joker Productions. And he's not the only one. I've seen others, but these benchmarks were a little more clear to be able to show on the stream here. The other ones are generally like live benchmarks where they're actually showing gameplay and you're seeing the live frame rates. And I just and there were enough to determine that they're all pretty much even. So we talked a little bit earlier about hyperthreading and how hyperthreading can be a hindrance for games. And if you notice here, we've got 3900X, the 9900K, 3700X, and the 9700K. And if you notice, on all the benchmarks across the board, the 9700K beats them all. And the reason why is because of that hyperthreading. Now, there have been tests that are old, a couple years ago, where they actually, professional reviewers took the 6-core and 4-core quad-core and disabled hyperthreading, and they actually found that it either made the performance worse or it was the same. But the anomaly here is with the 9700K, being that it's 8-core, it still has 8 threads. That has just not been the case with this particular processor. So if you're just gaming, that's it. You're not going to be doing anything else. As I'm doing with my gaming rig, And because of the cost, it's a no-brainer to go with the 9700K. But if you're going to be doing other things, production, even if you're not doing heavy production or anything like that, then the 9900K isn't even a contender anymore. It's gone. The reason why is because the 3900X is roughly the same price, and it, even though it doesn't match or beat the 9900K in gaming, it's still not too bad, and you're getting a huge amount of production value from it. And you also have a little bit more future proofing opportunity because you could pop out that chip from the board, and in 2 years you should be able to continue to upgrade, again depending on the board you go with. If you go with one of the lower end boards and one of the older boards, you're kind of pushing your luck. But like the X470 Asus Hero, the one that I ended up going with, should be okay, and anything above that you should be okay. Obviously if you go with an X570 board, you should be okay. But this was just my user case. The only reason I'm bringing it up is because, again, I've seen a lot of reviewers, harping on the fact that you should not buy the 9700K or the 9900K, for gaming. You should be going with the 3900X. That's if you're using it for other things. But I don't even have a web browser on my game rig. All I have installed on my game rig is just Steam, obviously Windows. The only updates that are necessary to keep it running correctly, both, with graphics, the graphics drivers and whatnot. I have Steam installed, and whatever I need for like my Razer mouse. That's it. I don't have anything else. I don't have a media player installed. I don't have a browser installed. I even disabled Windows Defender because I don't have to worry about, viruses, because I don't download anything on it, and I have everything firewalled. So, it's a very clean system, and that's just going to give me the best performance for that. But I know a lot of people aren't doing that. A lot of people aren't retarded like I am, and that's okay. To each his own. But I felt that it was still valid to bring it up because, people are just completely minimizing Intel, and not everybody's use case is the same. I don't imagine there are too many of you guys that are going to be doing the same thing that I'm doing, but maybe there are. And if there are, the 9700K is legit. And considering the price, I mean, I got mine for $364. That's not bad. I mean, now if it would have been $400 or more, then I might have started looking more towards going the direction of the 3900X, because even though it's still not as good on the gaming side, the production value is going to make up for it in the long run, because later on I would probably turn that into my HTPC and when I go to upgrade, but that's just not the case. So I already acknowledge I'm going to take a loss at some point, but that's just technology. So here's another slide. This is actually showing the 1% lows. And again, the 9700K beats it out. So again, I definitely am not recommending you guys go buy the 9700K unless you're doing something like what I'm doing, because I'm running a dual system setup where I've got a dedicated game rig and I got a dedicated stream rig. Most streamers are not doing that. The professional ones are, even though I don't consider myself a professional, meaning I'm not affiliated not affiliated. I'm not partnered, and I don't plan to be, but I am working towards affiliation. So if you guys want to help me out, a follow would definitely help with that. So anyways, if you're wanting to build a low end system or mid-range system, then AMD is definitely the way to go. And your use case on the high end, Intel is the only way to go if you're doing like what I'm doing. Aside from that, again, you should probably still be going with AMD. Even though there is some performance, it's still not hitting the mark on the game side in the long run. And Steve from Hardware Unboxed did a comparison test of a first gen AMD chip versus an Intel chip. And in the long run, the AMD chip is now outperforming it just due to age. And you also have to think of security risks too. the security patches that have been enabled on Intel. And I thought of this as well when I was thinking. My decision was not easy to make. It was actually really tough. But I also know that I have had some issues with certain titles in the past, Metro Exodus, Shadow of the Tomb Raider, and with those specific titles, even though I'm doing 4K and I'm more GPU bound, it's still they're still using quite a bit of CPU. Not to mention that when Cyberpunk 2077 comes out, I don't want to have to be concerned with that. I even went up and looked at the developers and what they're recommending. They're heavily favoring Intel. So again, that's why I decided to go with Intel, because I also plan to try to play that with RTX on, which is also going to be another performance hit. So I'm not saying that this is the exact right answer. I'm kind of taking a leap of faith that this is the right way to go. I know it'll still be good. It may not be as good as what I'm anticipating, but it'll still be better than what I would be getting from AMD, at least on the gaming side. Production, I wouldn't benefit at all, unfortunately. So it's pretty simple. If you're going low or mid-range or arguable high range, AMD is definitely the clear winner. Low end 3600, maybe 3600X. Mid-range 3600X, 3700X. 3800X, I don't know really where that's gonna fit, because I mean, when you look at the difference between the 3700X and the 3900X, they're both, the 3800X is an 8 core. It just has a higher TDP, So it's like, unless they fix things more with the BIOS and Ryzen Master, and you're getting significantly better boost clocks, I just don't think it's really going to provide that much more performance to warrant that extra $70. But that remains to be seen. But again, it's just to throw the cards on the table because we don't know, but just something in case you guys are wanting that, something to think about, because it may not be worth it. On the high end, it would, again, you'd probably want to compare at that point the 3700X, 38, and then the 39, and kind of go there. But it seems like it would probably be better to go to the 3900X, again, depending on what your budget is. On the graphics card side, if you're going low budget, 3600 or 3600X, if you're going to stream and you want a budget card, you can go with a 1660 Ti, or get yourself one of those 2060s. They're still going to be around. Even though that's a low-end system, and I said, yeah, it'd be a good idea to go with an 8 gig. You could still stream, but you're going to probably need to stream at like a minimum 720p 30 FPS, which is still fine. It'll work. It should work. I think it'd be fine. And you're going to also have to compromise a bit on your graphics, but you'll be able to do that. If you're not going to stream, then yeah, you might want to consider, the 5700. Mid-range, kind of the same deal. The difference is I probably would just target the 3700X for the mid-range CPU. I guess you could include the 3600X. Again, kind of, be flexible with your budget. And obviously we already covered memory, just slap yourself in some 16 gig. The only reason I'd recommend the BDI is if you're going to go high end, you want the absolute best of the West, balls to the wall. You've got the BDI charts for there and the links, so you can research it yourself, but it is going to be expensive. Not really sure it's worth the performance gain, but it might be something for you guys to investigate. And the high end, like I said, probably, a toss up between the 3700X to the 3900X. And if you're just gaming, that's all you're doing. Like I said, 9700K. I don't see any other processor from Intel really being a contender for any consideration whatsoever other than the 9700K. And that would be if only you're gaming on it, and that's it. Everything else, for the most part, you should be building an AMD system, which is good for us. They're cheaper and they have a lot more flexibility, and you have options. Even if you're not doing productivity now, you may do it later. So it's really cool. You also get a cooler, where Intel doesn't give you a cooler. You got to go buy one. So, and the coolers are pretty good. Let's talk real quickly about dual system setup, and then I think I'll be done. And if you guys don't have questions, I'll go ahead and, I'll give a little bit, and then I'll end the stream. And then obviously, if you guys come back later and have questions, you can drop them in the comments below. I'll do my best to answer them. So let's talk dual system setup. Not too dissimilar from what I have right now. So the advantage to a dual system setup is it allows you, I would probably only recommend it for 2 case scenarios. If you are an esports gamer and you're gaming at 1440p or higher, 1080p could be argued, or you are gaming in 4K. And the reason why is both esports, and even though if you're not technically an esports gamer, but you are competing, you are playing, you're going for that, either 1080p, 240 FPS, or you're going for 1440p, 144 to 165 FPS. You're wanting that. A dual system setup is one of the better ways to go, and for a few reasons. Now, it basically allows you to have your your machine is going to have all the resources dedicated to your game. You're not going to have to worry about any resources being eaten up by your stream. And believe me, if you're doing one of those 2 things, there may be a scenario, something else I might be missing here, but I can say from a gamer standpoint on that front, it is advisable to go with the dual system setup, not required, but it will drastically, you're not going to have any issues with performance. You're going to be able to game with no FPS hits, no compromises whatsoever. And that's one of the reasons why I went with the setup that I went with, because, I'm gaming in 4K and I wanted to just eliminate any potentiality and squeeze the most performance I could get. And that was the best way to do it. It's expensive though, because you're building 2 systems. However, you don't need to build a monster Threadripper like I did, or even go with this like a 3900X to do it. And that's where I want to kind of get into possibility of advisement on doing a dual system setup. Because if you were to ask me, would I prefer to do a 3900X gaming system to stream and game on and fully deck it out with the best, best RAM, high-end card, a 2080 Ti or whatever, or would I rather build, 2 low-end or 2 mid-range systems and do a dual system setup? I'd probably go with the lower or mid-range system, or a mix of both, and go with the dual system setup. But that's just because it kind of depends on what you're going to be doing. If you're just streaming, you're not really too concerned about providing any kind of extras to your stream that your viewers may or may not want to watch, then a single system is fine. But if you want to do other things, like, for example, let me see if I can pull it up here. And again, I'm just giving an example here. So I have the ability to do annotations on my stream. So if I'm gaming and I'm getting to a point and somebody's trying to give me directions and tell me where to go, or I'm trying to give directions to some of my viewers, I can go in there and I could, point, and basically have annotations on my stream to be able to do it. Right now, you need a dual system setup to be able to do something like this. The software is cheap and easy to set up. Well, easy to set up if you know how, and maybe I'll do a tutorial video later on to show how, but that is, and not too many people would maybe want that. It just depends on what you're wanting to do. But if you were to go with a dual system setup on the low end or mid range, you could, just build yourself a low end system if you want to do 1080p, and then maybe a mid range for the stream, or vice versa. The disadvantages, you got to buy 2 cases, 2 power supplies, and pretty much double of everything. But if you take the cost of what a monster system would cost you versus 2 lower end or mid-range systems will cost you, the two lower end mid-range systems might cost you a little bit more, but your flexibility and your performance is going to be better. And this is something I have tested and I do know, and I don't need to know exactly whether or not the 3700X or the new AMD cards, regardless if they offer streaming or not, is going to tell me whether or not a single system is going to outperform it or not. It's not. But do you need it? That is really up to you and what you're going to do with your stream. I felt I needed it for what I wanted to do. And again, like I said, it's expensive, and it does require a lot more technical know-how. But if you know where to go and research it, you can do it. Now, I didn't talk capture cards or anything like that. There are some capture card options for a dual system setup. You don't have to buy a capture card. There are some options. You can go with what is known as NDI Setup from NewTek through OBS, which allows you to stream from one machine to your stream machine. You don't have to go and spend $150, $200, or whatever capture card you're going to buy, and you can stream from your machine to your stream machine and then out to the world. And it's pretty easy to set up. It's actually really easy to set up. And that's free. So that cuts down the cost of a capture card. Now, some of you are probably wondering why I use a capture card. I use a capture card because I play in different resolutions. And when you play in different resolutions, there can be issues with NDI. And also, if you're recording in different resolutions, it's not as flexible as what a capture card would give me. But the cool thing is you can stream with NDI and then later buy yourself a capture card. At the end of the day, the capture card is always going to be better. It does cost more, but it's going to be better. And you won't have as much issue in regards to technical issues, because when I was running NDI, I would love to say there were no technical problems, but every now and again there were some technical problems, and those technical problems ultimately resulted in me having to close OBS, relaunch, and that meant I had to end my stream. And that's another reason why I went with a dual system setup, because more often than not, if you have a separate system, that's handling your stream, most of what you're doing is gaming. Sometimes games crash, and sometimes you may lock up your system and you got to shut your system down and reboot. If you're streaming and gaming on the same machine, you got to end your stream. And believe it or not, your viewers hate that shit. Believe me, they do. I know, because I hate it too when I go to a stream and that happens. I don't get mad at the viewer or the streamer, but it sucks. And more often than not, your viewers are going to leave unless they're just dedicated or they'll just have you tabbed or whatever. So to avoid that, you can keep your stream up while you're rebooting your gaming rig. And if you're saying, well, your stream rig could crash too. Yeah, that's true. But it's very rare that happens. Generally, because you're not generally doing a lot on your stream rig. It's mostly just, hosting your stream and your programs. When you're gaming, there's a lot more going on, so you have more potentiality of crashing. Another reason that, like I said, if you're on a single system, you have more potentiality to crashing or system lockups. I will admit, though, going with an 8-core and higher should be better. Should. But that, again, yet remains to be seen. There's another option too, and this gets way technical. And again, the link will be in the description below. This is something I have no interest in at this time and don't have the time for. But there's a thing called NGINX. And you can go watch the tutorial on it. And there's a link where you can go and sign up, I guess, and get whatever plugins you need for it. But it can be integrated with OBS. And basically, it allows you to have a host machine, and it's very similar to NDI, but you're streaming everything to a host machine, and then you're streaming from the host machine out to the world. It does open up a lot more doors for flexibility and opportunity, but it's extremely technical, far more than I really am interested in. I would like to learn it, but it's a time sink that I just don't have, and I've got other things I'd rather do. But I'm put it down there just as an option in case you want to go down that rabbit hole. It's there. So let's talk about console streaming and the options for that. Obviously, you can stream with a capture card. Oh, I did neglect one thing. So if you go with a capture card, I would highly recommend going with a 4K capture card, and I got some capture cards in the description below that will be linked. The capture cards, I'm going to recommend the AverMedia for a few reasons. Because number one, it's cheaper. It's only about $100 cheaper now, because Elgato has lowered the price because they had to, but it's still more expensive. I still don't recommend it because it runs hotter, for one. Number two, it doesn't support HDR, where the AverMedia does. And it does support, I think, HDR pass-through, or they were supposed to add it. I don't know if they ever added it, but it doesn't support like HDR. So the AverMedia does, and it also supports HDR pass-through. It also supports the opportunity where you can stream at you can game and stream at different resolutions. So for example, I game at 4K, but I'm streaming at 1080p. I am basically outputting to my capture card in 4K and converting it to 1080p 60 so my stream can stream it out to 1080p 60. Now, there is a way to do that with a 1080p 60 capture card, but that is extremely technical. It doesn't work half the time. It introduces screen tearing. Save yourself the headache. Either stick to NDI or just get yourself a 4K capture card. And these are things, yes, I've tested. And EPOS Fox did a video on it. And while it might have worked at the time when he did it, it doesn't work now. It's just not reliable. Save yourself some headache, because you also have to think about all the technical bullshit you're going to have to do and all the downtime of setting all this stuff up. I'm trying to, even though some avenues may be either more expensive or whatever, in the long run, it'll save you hours and sometimes weeks of frustration, only to realize that you should have just gone that way anyways. So that's the reason why I'm just saying, if you can afford the capture card, go with it. If you're scraping the barrel, NDI is something that I would use as a temporary thing until you can get a capture card. And go with a 4K because it'll allow you to game at whatever resolution you want with no compromises when you input it into your OBS to output to your stream. Now, let's talk consoles. So, obviously, you console gamers, I'm one of them, only on the PlayStation 4 though, you can stream from your console. However, when you stream from your console, you have no options really. You just set it, you're limited to what the PlayStation offers. There's an opportunity where you can, if you get a capture card, then you're good to go. You can, stream, just using your capture card. But I mentioned earlier, if you don't have the money for a capture card, you can use NDI. Well, unfortunately, NDI is not an option, and would be really interesting if PlayStation would implement this for the PS5, where you could stream it directly to OBS to output. But there is something you can stream, which is known as PS4 Remote Play. Now, PS4 Remote Play, I use it, but I use it mainly to integrate my Steam controls when I'm playing games on my PlayStation, so I can actually remap my buttons. But you can actually take the Remote Play, which can be 1080p 60 if you have a PlayStation Pro, and you can actually stream with that as a capture, use OBS to capture that window and stream. Now, I will admit that is not the most advisable way to do it. The graphic fidelity is not going to be very good, but it will probably be on par with what you'd be getting from your PlayStation, to be quite honest. So I guess it wouldn't be a downgrade, but it would open up the opportunity for you to be able to use a webcam and set up like a UI like what I have here. You'd have full control over your live stream UI and everything you want to do. Again, I would definitely work towards trying to get a capture card at some point if that's what you plan to do. Now, Xbox people, I don't own an Xbox. I really don't have any experience with Xbox, mainly because there's very few reasons to own one due to the lack of exclusives. And I'm not trying to, crap on Xbox, but that's the reason why. And I'm not the only one. This is kind of a general consensus in the gaming community. But if you want to stream with Xbox without a capture card, there's a website, and again, the link is in the description, called Go Lightstream, and this will only work with Xbox. It's unfortunate it doesn't work with the PlayStation, but it pretty much allows you to fully customize a stream as what you would do like on OBS, and stream your Xbox games. So I would imagine that if you don't own a PC for whatever reason, that would be probably a good way to go. And I didn't check if there was a fee for that or not. There may or may not be. I don't know, but it's there if you guys are interested in checking that out. It's been informative and stimulating. Thanks for all the info. I must head out. Thank you, Tragic. I'm almost done here anyways. I know I'm a blabbermouth, but I'm glad it was helpful. And have a good night. And I should be back to streaming soon. Take care. I think that's pretty much it for the whole stream side and everything. I think that's pretty much it. To be honest, I don't see anything else on the list here. If anybody has any questions now, feel free to ask. Obviously, this is a stream. It'll be archived. If you're watching it later as a video archive, and you have questions, post your questions in the comments below. I'll do my best to answer them. And again, I'm going to ask you guys, if you could, follow me on Twitter. I post a lot of my updates in regards to my channel and my streaming on Twitch. If you're interested in following me or checking out my live stream, I welcome you to subscribe to me on YouTube. I encourage it because I am planning on doing YouTube videos, hopefully in the future, like tutorials related to gaming, specifically with the Steam software and, stuff like that. But I will not be streaming on YouTube anymore, so follow me on Twitch if you're interested in catching my live stream. And tonight will be my last night for Mixer. I decided to give Mixer one more night. No longer going to be doing Mixer. YouTube their days are numbered. I may decide my next stream. I may just be on Twitch. I don't know. So unless anybody has any questions, I'll wait a little bit here. And then I will go ahead and get off. And I think I pretty much covered everything that I wanted to cover. Probably went a little over. Not bad. 3 hours and 30 minutes. Not too bad. I was targeting 2 hours, but oh well. Looks like I got some lurkers, but no questions from our lurkers. Okay, lurkers. Well, thank you very much for watching, listening, or whatever. Last chance, last call. If you got any questions, comments, or anything like that, do it now. I'm going to get off, and I still got a lot of work to do tonight. Okay, guys. Well, I want to thank everybody for watching, whether you watch the live stream or whether you're watching on the YouTube as an archive video. Please follow me on Twitch if you're interested in catching the live stream. And if you have any questions, post in the comments below. And I wish you guys the best on all your upgrading and purchasing endeavors for this new launch. And this is really a really good time for gaming. This is really good. And we got to be really grateful for AMD bringing us this new tech. So, all right, guys, I hopefully will see you streaming in the near future. I will post on Twitter, hopefully like a day or so before I kick off my stream again. Thank you guys for watching, and you have a good night.